Good evening and welcome to the January 21st, 2020 meeting of the City of Vacaville Planning Commission. Chair Barley, Director Barley, can we go ahead and have a call of the roll, please?
Chairman Colley?
Here.
Vice Chair Aldrich? Here. Commissioner Beaumont? Here. Commissioner Fortney? Here. Commissioner Alan Johnson? Here. Commissioner Brett Johnson? Here. And Commissioner Nicolai? Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. If you'd all please rise and join me. Commissioner Beaumont, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Communications, Mr. Barley.
We do have one email from Lisa Edwards that we put on your dais, and it's on the Alamo Mixed Use Project.
Okay, then we'll come back and refer to that when we start the public hearing on that. Next item is the item number 4, approval of the agenda. Do any of the commissioners have proposed changes to the agenda? If not, I'll take a motion a second to approve the agenda as presented.
I move approval.
Motion by Commissioner Aldridge. Second by Commissioner Beaumont. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. It is approved. Next item is business from the floor. This is the time to address the commission with issues that are not on the agenda, but that are within the commission's subject matter jurisdiction. A maximum of 3 minutes time per speaker or per group based on the municipal code and the government code. Are there any members of the public who would like to come before the commission and address us on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Don't see anyone getting up, so we will be done with business from the floor. The next item is the consent calendar. There is one item, approval of the minutes of December 17th, 2019 meeting. Are there any proposed changes to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll ask, do I have a motion for the consent calendar?
So moved.
Commissioner Fortnoy with a motion, Commissioner Alan Johnson with a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Are done. Then we will move on to the public hearing, item number 7A, the Alamo Mixed Use Project. For those members of the audience who have not been to a commission meeting before, we have an initial presentation that is made by staff. They go over the items that are in the staff report. The commissioners may ask questions of staff at that time. We'll then open it for a public hearing. The applicant is usually given the opportunity to come up and make the first initial statement, and then we allow any member of the public to come up. We generally try and limit comments to about 3 minutes, but since we have a fairly small group, I'm not going to be real tight on time limit. There may be questions back and forth from commissioners to staff and members of the audience. Once all the public hearing is done, we close the agenda item, and then we go ahead and have a discussion amongst members of the commission and a motion and take an action. So that's how it will go. Before I ask staff to make their presentation, I will state that I had some communications with the applicant, and the applicant's engineer had a meeting at the office, a chance to look at the plans, and they advocated in favor of it. Are there any other commission members that had meetings such as that or other ex parte communications? I've seen several other commissioners have indicated that they have. So it's good for the public to know when we've had communications with anybody other than just what you see here. And with that, I am going to turn things over to our staff for a presentation on the project.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. The item for you tonight is the Alamo Mixed Use Project, which is a request to construct a residential and commercial mixed use project on the north side of Alamo Drive across from Raleigh Drive. The applications are environmental assessment, development agreement, tentative subdivision map, and a plan development. So this is the general location of the area in green. It's behind the Lucky Shopping Center, and again on north side of Alamo Drive, across from Raleigh Drive. Quick summary of the project. The site is approximately 9.35 acres. The project consists of 73 townhomes. The complex includes a clubhouse, common open space, 2-car garages, and various related landscaping and improvements associated with the complex. The project also includes a commercial element, which is roughly 6,500 square feet of commercial with on-site parking. A portion of the site is also reserved for a detention basin. That's approximately 3 acres. And this project also proposes to extend Beach Lane, which is currently closed off and connected to Alamo Drive. The project also includes a request for parking exception for the commercial per the code, going from 26 spaces to 19 spaces on site. This is a rendering that shows sort of what the layout is going to be. The area in pink is the commercial coming into the site, detention basin to the south, and then the townhome complex. And this shows general layout of landscaping too. So this is a pretty good rendering of what the project could look like. This is just the map overlaid on the site, and adjoining the commercials where the staging area would be for once construction, if approved, once construction starts. This is one of the few projects that we've had in a long time that we have had virtually no comments on the design. It's a well-designed project when it comes to the buildings and the site and the clubhouse and the commercial center, so we're pretty happy with the applicant's efforts on the design. Just another look at the townhomes. This is a rendering of the clubhouse. Again, it is, as we talked about in the staff report, a modern design that, in our opinion, fits well with what the project is, what the general plan anticipated with the mixed-use development, and sort of just improving the aesthetics of that area one project at a time. So this is, again, a well-designed project. This is the clubhouse, and this would be the commercial pad. And the commercial pad also, again, the landscape design is also well done in our opinion. Attention to detail, the terracing that you see there, and also having some outdoor space in case one of the spaces or one or two of the spaces are occupied by eating establishment. So the development agreement consists of obligations for the city and the applicant. City obligations are to extend the approval of the project for 15 years. Typically, we've had development agreements, they've been for 10 years. In this case, what's different about the 10 years versus 15 years, the projects that have had 10 years, it's really been up to the applicant to finish the project. This project is a little bit different in that finishing it requires some efforts by the city to evaluate sites for detention basins or to address other storm, flood control opportunities. So we felt 15 years was an okay idea here. And in terms of city obligations, it also exempts a project from PGO allocation. So that means that they would get their building permits without having to ask for special consideration from the city council. In terms of applicant obligations, annexing to the Community Facilities District number 12, which is for infill projects and funds police and fire services. Creating a lighting and landscape maintenance district to take care of some landscaping and lighting around the site and complying with all the project approvals for this project. And in the future, if there's a proposal for the development of the detention basin, those will be considered under this agreement as well. The tentative subdivision map and plan development, the map is creating 82 lots for residential, commercial, and detention basin, also for creating parcel for the public street. The project is going to be done in two phases. The first phase would be really the majority of the site, the commercial, the residential, and the street, and the detention basin. And the phase two would be, again, if certain things play out, there would be an opportunity for the applicant to develop the detention basin site at staff level review. So that wouldn't come to planning commission, it would be staff level. And then plan development is anytime mixed use developments proposed, a plan development is required. And in this case, it does specifically address a reduction in parking. And we've been able to meet the findings for the plan development because there is sufficient parking on the street adjoining the commercial center. And again, based on our analysis, even if there were some eating establishments that have a higher ratio of parking, there would be sufficient parking, on-street parking to accommodate that. And we're not anticipating that the whole thing is going to be eating establishment, but that's one thing that we do through the TI process. As users come in, we double-check parking, we double-check other things to make sure they're in compliance with not only the approval, but the code.
Payman, you said a moment ago that under certain conditions, the detention basin project site could be developed. What are those conditions?
So the city has been, so I'll just give a brief explanation and perhaps our public works staff can give you more detail if that's not sufficient. So the city, to address either flooding or other stormwater issues, have been looking at detention basin site upstream from the site. And we've had some opportunities, they haven't panned out. So I think the city is going to continue to try to look at detention basin sites, larger detention basin sites, to address sort of citywide issues related to flooding and stormwater control. But again, I would have to defer to our Public Works staff for details. So really, other than the parking reduction, this is a project that meets all development standards. And it's our first real mixed-use project that is pretty much as the general plan had anticipated. And we're pretty happy with it because, again, I think there were a lot of conversations with the applicant on this, but one thing that we were pretty happy with from the beginning was the design of it and what the aesthetics of this site are going to look like. And we do feel that it is a compatible site with the adjoining neighbors, considering the general plan had assumed a much higher level of development here, 160 to 200 units for residential, or 50 to 70,000 square feet of commercial. So this is compatible considering what the general plan had anticipated, and the zoning's in place. And previously, the site was zoned for 4,500 square foot lots. We recently had the Planning Commission reviewed this several months ago, some citywide zone changes that also included this site. So initially, the project included a zone change, but that's already gone in place. So the proper zoning is in place to accommodate this project. For CEQA, we prepared with our consultant Dudek prepared a modified initial study. And really, this is something that we're going to do more often, where there are opportunities to rely on a general plan EIR, where everything's been addressed and it's consistent. We're going to rely on the general plan EIR. And this is one site. We've had other projects rely on the general plan EIR, where we don't have to do a brand new environmental document if nothing new is coming up that the general plan hadn't anticipated, and if the project site hasn't really had any changes in its environmental shape. So those apply, and we were able to do a modified initial study versus having a mitigated neg deck, which could be a lengthier process. And again, because it all meets the general plan, meets all the findings, doesn't have any significant issues that weren't considered under the general plan EIR, we were able to do a modified initial study. So as I mentioned, we do support the project. This is what we were expecting and what the Planning Commission and Council had anticipated going through the general plan process, and the mixed-use zoning complies with the general plan. As conditioned, it complies with the zoning ordinance. It certainly provides needed housing, and these aren't your typical single-family homes that you see that we have a lot of in the city, and we continue to get development on. This is different. It's sort of what's considered the middle housing, missing middle housing of townhomes, duplexes, court homes. So this is the type of housing that the city certainly needs, and 73 units would be helpful to our inventory of housing units. So we're happy about that. It is a less intensive development proposal than what the general plan had anticipated. It is, in our opinion, compatible with adjoining uses, with the commercial and with the residential. And it's one of the more well-designed site and landscape plans that we've seen. So we're certainly supportive of the applicant's efforts in that. And so by that, we'd like to recommend that the Planning Commission recommend the City Council to adopt the ordinance approving the development agreement, and adopt the resolution approving the tentative parcel map, the modified initial study, and the plan development. That concludes my presentation. Public Works staff is here to answer any questions, and also Dudek, our environmental consultant, is here as well. Thank you.
Well, I'll ask, do any of my commission members, starting with Commissioner Beaumont? Go ahead.
Thanks, Payman. My one concern really is the 4-foot fence around the detention basin. Doesn't seem like very much of a protective fence for something that may be full of water with kids around it. Is 4 foot adequate?
So similar projects that have had water features or detention basins, it hasn't been a tall fence. So 4 feet. We're not expecting that. I mean, the public access to the site is on sidewalks. We're not anticipating that there is going to be a path around it or that sort of close access. So we feel that 4 feet is sufficient, but certainly open to Planning Commission's suggestions for a higher fence.
Just an observation. I didn't think it was very high for keeping kids out of there if they want to get in there. But and my other question is, extra parking inside the residential area. I only noticed a few parking spaces. If these people have more than 2 cars, where are they going to park?
So the mixed-use zoning only requires 1 space a unit. So they're already doubling it by having a two-car garage.
Okay.
And that's, again, with the mixed-use zoning, it's to entice that sort of development by having units that are more compatible to either smaller families or folks that don't have a lot of cars. But it goes beyond what the code requires, because the code requires one a unit, and at a minimum, they have 2 per unit. But it meets the code.
So at worst, they'd be parking on beach if they had extra cars?
Yeah, and there is, like I said, our conservative estimates were 40-plus parking spaces on beach, but I'm sure you could fit in a few more.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Fortney.
Yeah, Payman, a couple of questions for you. First comment, yeah, much-needed housing, that gap we always talk about, the city not having in this project, hopefully will fulfill that. My first question for you, though, kind of piggytails off of Commissioner Beaumont in the parking. Conditions of approval 21 talks about the owner and operator of the townhome complex shall include a provision in each lease that allows storage in the garage. That condition, if we have a for-sale product, I assume this is all gone. And then the last sentence says, no storage shall be allowed if the vehicles cannot be parked within the garage. So the enforcement of that, is that the HOA enforcement on that?
There isn't going to be an HOA. That's really a requirement so when we have zoning enforcement issues, that's a homeowner not complying with either city code or zoning, the zoning ordinance. This would be a similar one where we, and it's, again, not something that we're anticipating. I think we've tried to have conditions that were general in nature because we've had them happen in other places. So, for example, Portofino was a project where we started to consider storage inside their garage because these are small lots. They were small lots, so we want to have some language in there. In case there was an issue, we'd have something to fall back on.
Okay.
But there wouldn't be a HOA. But similar to any other home in the city, if there are certain things that are in violation of the code or conditions of approval for that subdivision, that's when we would get involved, based on if there's a complaint.
Okay, then no restrictions on the for-sale product?
No.
Okay. Question, we talked about flooding. What will the benefits to the rest of the neighborhood or surrounding neighbors once this detention basin is put in place?
So I'm going to defer to our public works staff to provide a more detailed explanation on that.
Okay.
And I'll ask Public Works staff to then come up at this time. Let's address that question right now.
Tim Burke, city engineer. So the project is conditioned to mitigate any kind of additional flow or any kind of benefit that they had previously provided to the existing surrounding area by having some flooding on their property. They mitigate with the detention basin. So it's not going to really add benefits to the existing surrounding area, but it will prevent any additional flooding because of development for the surrounding area.
Okay. So we wouldn't be able to, there won't be enough drainage
No.
for the rest of the neighborhood to possibly remove flood insurance or any of those?
No, no, and that's what you were alluding to earlier about with the status of the city project upstream, and that would mitigate. It would be a detention basin that potentially can mitigate a lot of the flooding that happens in that area, and if that moves forward such that it mitigates the flooding to pre-project flows, then they can go ahead and move forward with the phase 2 portion of the development and fill in their existing project site detention basin and go ahead and develop it.
Okay. Then my last question is, going back to the conditions of approval, because this is a needed project in the city and we'll put some good housing units in there, our stormwater detention basin, the conditions there in 66, it says that we're not going to pull a building permit until we have operation or completion of the detention basin. So that's 6, 8, we could be pushing a half a year or farther out. Is there any flexibility for us to work with staff and the applicant to figure something out?
Well, and we had a lot of discussions with the applicant on this, and as this project has been a long time coming. And the main issue that it's been a long time coming is because of drainage. The existing neighborhood floods frequently. And so we've been very careful about putting any additional burden on the existing neighborhood. And so what we don't want to do is kind of put the cart before the horse and start with buildings and building before we put in the detention facilities. The applicants talked about, there might be something in the future where we could put in some sort of temporary system and have a temporary access so we can get going on building. And I understand the need for the housing, I truly do. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to impact the existing neighborhood with a drainage problem. And we've seen several developments where they get going, they get started, and then they stall for some reason or another. And we wouldn't want to, again, have this project stalled midway and not get the detention basin done. I don't think that's right for the existing community. And so that's why we put that in there. Now, if they were to come back to us and say, hey, we've got a great plan, and here's how it's going to proceed, we'll take a second look at it. But I think right now we want to have the attitude that drainage is first and foremost on our mind. We don't want to affect the existing neighborhood. You need the detention basin grading to really start with the building pads. In the normal course of construction, the first thing you do is you grade. And the first thing that you need to do is to grade the detention basin. The next function is to start with underground utilities. That'd be the drainage pipes. And then subsequently putting in water and access. Then, once you got all those foundation and infrastructure in, that's when you start building. So we just wanted to make it clarified that clearly right now the drainage is of the utmost concern.
And that's where I would be in the same spot with both
Yes.
you and public safety and fire, that safety is
Right.
at the utmost. But I'm looking at maybe a possibility of some flexible language that says if they bring a plan back to you, that you say, you know what, yeah, this would work, then we would be able to
And I
go
understand
vertical.
that. We talked a lot with the applicant about that. But I think right now, I don't want to give the impression at all that we're going to move forward with temporary facilities or have the applicant think that we're going to look at approving something. That there is something out there that we can be able to start with the homes. And so
Well,
that's why I
think
wanted
if
to make
the language
it.
is there, you have that flexibility to decline the plan when it comes to you, that it's not.
I
But we're supposed to be
understand.
business-friendly, develodeveloper-friendly, but yet it looks like a condition here that a
Well, I
good
wouldn't
housing
say,
unit
I
that
wouldn't
could go
say it's,
forward.
like I said, I wouldn't say it's developer unfriendly or anything like that. This is the normal course of construction. Normal course of construction is you start with grading, then you start with drainage. We wanted to make sure, I definitely want to get the development moving forward, and we'll look into moving things quicker. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to impact the existing community. So that's why we have it written that way. And we wanted to make it clear that this is of the utmost importance.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Brett Johnson.
I definitely understand the need to protect the surrounding neighborhood from additional flooding caused by construction activities, and your point accordingly. But just intuitively, I think we all learned when we were kids on a rainy day that digging a hole fills up with water. It doesn't go anywhere else, right? Unless it's a downstorm or a downpour. So in the event that, there was potential flood activities, wouldn't it, and the project stalled, wouldn't it then just go into the empty hole?
If it was graded properly, but if it was,
why
if it
would
was
it not
not,
be graded properly?
well, that's what the condition says, is to go ahead and build it.
No, you said graded. So grading and completion is not the same. So if it's graded properly per improvement plans, which I'm sure are forthcoming, that would dictate how it is graded, correct? So if it's graded appropriately prior to completion, would it still not retain water?
Actually, the way the condition reads is, as long as it's operational. As long as the detention basin is operational. So if it operates the way it's supposed to, then that's fine. They don't have to put all the final, the fencing around it, the landscape that needs to go around it to make sure that it's complete, as long as it's operational. And I believe that's the way the condition reads.
That is how it reads.
So are you
So
saying that it doesn't need to be operational, or?
I don't think it does from a construction standpoint, because obviously this project is going to have to bond for all of its construction activities. And in the event that the market dictates that it stalls, the city will have the wherewithal to jump in and call those bonds and complete the infrastructure if necessary. Further, we have, as Commissioner Fortney mentioned, we do have a reputation as being a builder-friendly community. The planning staff, directors, council members. The unfortunate reality is that the Public Works Department does not have that same reputation. And I feel that conditions such as this and your obvious inflexibility to work with it is kind of detrimental to the overall city, and it concerns me.
Okay. Well,
really
I'm
does.
sorry you feel that way. My first concern is to the existing residents of the city of Vacaville. And I want to make sure that nothing gets in the way of the existing residents having any kind of further problems. And so you are correct that we do have bonding and require bonding. We've gone through that process where we've had to try and go to a bonding company and secure the bondholder to complete the improvements. That takes a lot of time. And I've seen it happen, and I've seen it happen over a year or multiple years. And so I don't want to go through a winter where we have building on site that could contribute to further flooding areas. That's what our thinking was on it.
And by the pure nature of what you said, being speculation, it is part of the planning commission and city council's efforts to approve projects that are financially viable, that can actually deliver what they hope to deliver. And I think there are many of us in this room that know of other projects that have recently been approved that are not financially viable, that are not moving forward, that we don't need to mention, but it does happen in our city. And so we have to be conscientious of business plans of the developers and how certain conditions can affect those business plans, and the biggest one being time. Because time does significantly affect private investment. So the timing of which, the completion of this particular detention basin and being able to execute on the other parts of their business plan to make sure that the project is financially viable, I think is an issue. So kind of echoing Commissioner Fortney's request, I would like to see 66B on the conditions be amended to something that's mutually agreeable, that allows the flexibility that I think that we all want, but don't believe that this, as written, allows.
Commissioner, I'll make sure then, when we actually go for motions, that we come back and specifically address 66B before we move on with other items. So just help me remember that that's on the list. Do we have any other commissioners that have questions for staff at this time? Okay, thank you, Public Works, for coming up. And at this point, Commissioner Alan Johnson.
Just real quick, I was going to ask about the city's overall plan with the project, but that isn't mainly what I want to say. First of all, to the applicant and to the design team, beautiful buildings. They really look fantastic. The other thing for staff is I noticed in attachment 4 that we went above and beyond legal requirements in our noticing, which I want to applaud. That's been one of my things that I'm pushing for. And I know later in tonight's meeting, we're going to have conversation on our public involvement strategy. So I did notice that this is above and beyond, and I appreciate that.
At this point, I'm going to open this, wait, Commissioner Aldrich, sorry, just hold on a second. I'm not going to open the public hearing until Commissioner Aldrich has his chance to speak. Go ahead, Jen.
I would like to add something about the detention basin, and I applaud Public Works for wanting to get that in place before building goes on. My daughter and son-in-law live 2 blocks from that neighborhood and had 22 inches of water in their house. And a number of their neighbors lost their homes because they didn't have flood insurance and were not able to recover and just had to walk away. That neighborhood has really had some tough times. And I applaud you for wanting to get that detention basin in place so that there's not a chance that that could happen again to those people that live over there, because it was a mess. 389 homes with over 20 inches of water in their homes. It isn't a pretty sight, especially Christmas week. So thank you very much. And I also want to thank the Gaspars for this wonderful project. I know we've worked on this for years, years. And I think it's great. I think it's beautiful. And I think it's something Vacaville really, really needs and is going to appreciate. So thank you.
This again, no more commissioners are requesting to speak, so the public hearing is open. Again, we'll offer the applicant an opportunity to come up and make opening remarks and then take comments from the general public. Would the applicant or the applicant's engineer or architect like to speak?
Hello, my name is Kirsten Gaspar. I'm a 50% owner in the land with my father, Martin, and we just wanted to first and foremost thank you for your time and the consideration you're going to give to the project this evening. We're certainly excited to be here, and it's been a collective effort on our team and staff, and I think it's something that we're all proud to present. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Pat Costanzo to come forward, and he'll speak to the details of the project and maybe be able to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Sorry. Good evening, Honorable Chair and Commission members. My name is Pat Costanzo, and I'm the developer helping the Gaspars with this project. And I have a full presentation. I'm going to go through it quickly and skip things that Payman's already covered to not waste time, but there are some details that more about the project itself that people in the audience might want to know about as far as the houses, et cetera. So we have our development team here. I'm going to talk to you about that quickly and then go through the proposed project and then any questions or answers. I'm the developer. The owners are Martin and Kirsten. You've met them. Architects are Dahlin Group, and we have Darian and Ritteraj here, and Chriselle, actually. We have a third one. And then we have our civil engineer is PEI, and that is Tom Felipe. And then our landscape architect is Isaacson Wood and Associates, Jay Isaacson. He's not here, but you can see the good work that he does. So you know where the vicinity of the site is, so I'll skip that one. That's just an aerial. So the overall property is, as Payman said, 9 acres. I'm going to not talk about any of this because you've already heard it. So let's go to the next. So we have 73 townhouse, and we have 14 buildings, and they range from 4 to 7 units. And there's 5 floor plans, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom, and they go from 1,420 to 2,010 square feet. And then the commercial is in 2 phases, and the phase 1 is the 6,460 square foot. And the phase 2 is approximately 3.5 acres where the basin is. And again, once and if, only if, the downstream detention issues are solved, will it be developed. So with any project, when you start designing it, you look at your constraints. And obviously the big constraint here was the flooding. And two, we have residential neighbors all the way around us to the north and to the east, and then we have a commercial site, and we have Alamo. And so being mixed use, it made a lot of sense to go with a horizontal mixed use on this project where we put the residential in the back and the commercial in the front up along Alamo. From the next slide. So here's the site plan, and the pink, as Payman pointed out, is the first phase commercial. And we tucked the parking behind that so that when the street scene, as you drive by, you see the presence of the architectural feature of the building. And then the community will be gated, and just one correction, there will be an HOA on the project because it is private, and the HOA will maintain the interior of the property and all landscaping and that type of stuff. We have, again, proposed this to be gated, and so in the center of the site, you see the wider opening. That vehicular traffic is where it can come in and out, and then up on the top of the site plan, you can see another driveway, and that's an exit only. The townhouses are designed with a traditional modern look. Let me go to the next slide, please. Let's keep going on that. That's just describing the floor plans. I'll do that when they're in front. Go ahead. Yeah. One more? One more? Oh. Wait, well, nothing's coming up. What's going on? You delete my slides, Payman? There's the commercial. We'll talk about the commercial side. That's the phase one rendering. And for those in the audience, that you're looking right at the corner of where Beach hits Alamo. And so the feature of the building there with a lot of glass, and also that front space was designed such that if a food establishment goes in there, there's some patio seating out in front.
Hold on for a second, I have a question from Commissioner Brett Johnson.
Yeah.
Pat, quick question. From a final map standpoint, are you looking at 3 large lots on this particular project, or how are you?
Yeah, there's the large lot, but the tentative map, I mean, we'll go right into a final map with the individual lots for the residential. And then we'll have a large lot for each commercial section.
Okay. And then
there's the streets also a lot, and then there's some little parcels. I think Payman called out 82 parcels total.
Okay. And are you looking at a fee simple ownership or
Yes.
a condo map?
We're looking at fee simple.
Okay. The same for the commercial?
Well, I'd have to defer to Martin on that.
To be
I
determined?
mean, I think you're gonna own the whole building, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just curious. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just curious.
Let's go to the next. I don't know what happened to my slides, but keep going, I guess. Wow, we missed all our elevations. I think Payman stole them for his presentation. Anyhow, we carried the conceptual theme throughout, as you've seen in your package, the architecture, and in Payman's slides. The architecture in the clubhouse of the residential looks exactly like the retail, so that it's a cohesive mixed-use project. We did do community outreach, as Payman mentioned, but we did have a meeting on the 25th. Besides, we sent individual letters out to all the neighbors right adjacent to us and across the street from them, and met with people in their living rooms and discussed the project. And then on the 25th, we had a presentation at Three Oaks Community Center, and had folks there and did a presentation similar to this and answered questions. Next, if there's anything, keep going. Questions? Oh, okay. Okay. So anyhow, let me address some of the things that came up in your questions. So first, the HOA I wanted to address, and so we are having an HOA. And then on the whole drainage issue, just let me assure you that we designed this. We had to make sure that the finished floor of the houses are outside of the 100-year flood zone, and that in an event of a 100-year flood, that the water coming from any of the neighbors will come onto our site and flow out. And that is all a design that is computer modeled, and literally Wes Yost, who is also the city's hydrologist, we've run 50 to 100 computer models to make sure we get it right, and to make sure that there was no additional water being placed upon any of the neighbors. So no impact to the neighbors, and in some cases, it may help the neighbors. We're not representing that anyone can get out of the floodplain insurance or anything, but it's likely that they will be helped. No, well, we have to go through, it's a CLOMAR process where you go to the, get it out of the flood district, because we're in it now, but with the designs we have, we're told that'll get us out. Yeah. So, you know, in relation to the 66B that came up, we agree and appreciate, we would like some flexibility in that. Let me assure you that if we're going to do any construction, and we may have to do temporary basins. You saw the big the community center. There's a big area there. We could put one if we need to. But we are also monitored by the Regional Water Board. They come out and inspect your project weekly. And if you're putting water off-site or anything, they fine you big time. So we have every reason to make sure that we're containing the water. And naturally, if we are able to get a plan approved, we got to work through building and through fire and through public works. So as was suggested by a couple commissioners, some flexibility saying, you know, I mean, two things would either be the basin has to be operational by occupancy, so we have no one moving in, or we'll even go as far as just, you know, that a plan will be submitted and, you know, be reviewed, and if it could work out, it could be done. But it's in the city's absolute discretion still. We're not trying to do anything wrong. We're just trying to, if possible, build sooner than later so we can get out of the ground quicker. And I believe that answered the questions that came up. And so, any questions of me?
Do we have any commissioners with questions for the applicant before we go on to the general public? See none?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there are others, we'll call you. Commissioner Brent Johnson.
Do any of the proposed plans have ground floor living?
Yes. Well, it's ground floor bedrooms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ground floor bedrooms. And maybe this is a question for Tom. Are you able to get out, be considered raised above the floodplain if your main living area and or bedrooms are not on the ground level? And is that something that you guys have considered?
Well, we're going to be out of the floodplain no matter what.
I know.
For the sake of the record, since that was a question asked, I want to make sure, rather than Mr. Flippy answering
sorry.
from the audience,
Yes.
that he comes and speaks to the microphone.
I think in lieu of having to use the excavated dirt from the, obviously there was an off-haul requirement, but, and maybe that's one of the driving factors of raising the building pads, but would you necessarily have to raise the building pads if you didn't have ground floor, bed, or living?
Well, to be candid with
Could
you.
you identify yourself for the record?
Pardon me?
please?
Oh, thank you. Tom Filippi, Filippi Engineering. I've been here once or twice before. So to be very candid, our goal, yes, technically, if we just have garages on the ground floor, we could have the flood elevation into a garage, but that's not our interest. Our interest, if I could amplify, because I was going to do this later in the evening, but between West Jose and I, it's no understatement to say that we ran through 50 to 100 computer models. And really what we're doing with this project is we're providing a place for the water on Southwood Drive, which floods as it comes south from Peabody. As that area floods, we're providing a way for the water to get through our project into our detention basin. So it's, you know, I had a long conversation with West Jost earlier today because I knew I was going to be coming here, and I knew that based on the modeling and the work that we had done, and we got into changing a certain pad 1/10 of a foot here or creating a little bigger ditch there just to make sure that in no instance was the floodwater at all ever one time worse in the Southwood area or down to Tulare. I have friends in Tulare. None of us will forget the December 30th flood. I lost, my daughter's car was totaled in the flood because my house was flooded. So none of us will forget that. So we were very, very careful. I have, and West Jose would confirm, in my 42 years of doing construction projects in Vacaville, we have never analyzed a piece of property as stringently and as carefully as we have here. So what we're doing is we're providing a way for the floodwaters in Southwood to actually come through our property and get into the detention basin. So it was, I think the city engineer indicated that some people would not come out of the floodplain. Actually, that's not quite correct. We are going to have some areas where people, especially closer to Peabody, will actually, with our work, because of our work, will actually come out of the floodplain. So there'll be three classes of homes in the area. Some will come completely out of the floodplain. Some will be more marginal, where instead of a foot or more, there'll be less than a foot of potential flooding, which does impact in a favorable way their flood insurance. And then some will have an improvement. So we've worked very, very hard. So the idea of, well, maybe we could raise it a little bit because we let the floodwaters, that was not our interest. Our interest was making sure all of our homes are out of the floodplain in totality, as well as improve the surrounding area to the best of our ability. It's a small site. It's only a 10-acre site, a little less than 10, and we had very little area to work with. But that was the overall goal. I know the area very, very well, and I didn't want to have a problem ultimately.
Definitely appreciate the clarification. Would those residents that could potentially be removed from the floodplain have to take any action on their part to get that verification from FEMA?
Well, there's going to be a process, and we're going to be going through what's called a conditional map revision. CLOMAR is what it's called. And we will start that before we do the final construction work. So we will be meeting with FEMA about that. We will indicate areas that we think come out of the floodplain as a result of the work. Remember too that West Yost has analyzed this area because of this project, unlike at any other time. I mean, we've all known that there's an issue there, but we now know what the issues are much, much better as a result of the last literally 4 years of work that we've done on this project. So we will be going through the CLOMAR process with FEMA, which is what you do ahead of the construction, and we will hopefully be identifying areas that are now out of the floodplain. Now, I believe, and I'm not an expert in this, but I believe those homeowners will then need to apply and get a flood certificate to then actually show that they're out of the floodplain, because we're going to be able to detail exactly where the floodplain is in the various areas, especially as you come down Southwood Drive and around.
Gotcha. I guess to further my question, is there any potential opportunity once your studies with West Yost and FEMA through your CLOMAR process, is there any possibility that once the additional areas have been identified that there could be a noticing to those that would allow them to know that they are now eligible to request for that?
Well, certainly we're going to work with Public Works and identify those areas with them. I'm downtown, a block and a half that way from here, so we'll be more than willing to have that kind of records, and if the city wants to advertise it or anything else, we'll certainly be willing to, let people know the results of the analysis that we've done.
Yeah.
And how that it may or may not impact them. We have to remember that each of those homeowners are going to have to get a flood insurance survey done to verify what the finished floor elevations of the property is, and then we have to compare that to the new maps that are being generated. But again, I can't overemphasize this. We are making that area better, and that's a bottom line.
No, definitely. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Commissioner Beaumont, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. When and if that flood basin fills up, where does that excess water go if there's more excess water?
Well, it's designed to, I guess you could talk a 1,000-year storm, it would fill up, but we have it designed so that it would take the water from a 100-year storm event and hold it, and then what happens is there's a small pipe, it meters it out. Okay. So as the water comes in, it's still going out, but what we're doing is we're taking the peak off. What causes the flooding is you have a situation where there's a lot of water and then there's a huge peak, and we're taking that peak volume and storing it. So then as the storm passes, there will be a pipe that lets the water continue to flow. There's no mechanical pumping or any of those kinds of things.
So it's kind of like the detention basins behind Foothill Park?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
I'm going to ask the Director of Public Works to come up and address the issue.
Thank you, Commissioner. Sean Cunningham, Director of Public Works. Nothing that Mr. Filippi just said I disagree with. Everything he said is exactly right. Tim Burke did a great job of emphasizing that we like this project. We're not trying to be an impediment. Public Works is not trying to be inflexible. But at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that the city is protected and that our standards are adhered to. As far as the flooding, this project, we are very confident. West Yost is our consultant. And we worked with them very closely to ensure that the design of this project does what it needs to do, which is mitigate its own drainage, but more importantly to us, ensure that it does not exacerbate the problem that occurs in Southwood. And we are confident that as it's designed, that is the case. It will protect itself, and it will not make the situation worse in Southwood. I hope that Mr. Filippi's right, that we pull pads out of the floodplain. I think that's very optimistic. Certainly, none of the houses up near Brookdale and Tulare will be pulled out of the floodplain, and I want to make that clear because this basin is downstream of those houses. So they will have already flooded by the time the water gets down to this project. The misconception as I'm listening, and Tim did a very good job. The only reason I'm up here is because I want to clarify what I think is a misconception by the applicant and perhaps some of the commission. The issue here that we're concerned about is timing. It's not the design. If during the course of construction of the project, because they didn't construct their drainage system, their project floods, that is of no concern to me. My concern is that when they come in and build the pads on the north portion of the parcel and they raise the elevation of the land, thereby impeding the overland flow from the Southwood subdivision across that land as it is historically done, without constructing the detention or the drainage facilities, including the detention basin, to receive that drainage water and convey it through the site, or even if there is the perception that that is what's happening, the folks in Southwood are going to call me. And that's what I want to avoid. So I want to make sure that we're all
Sean,
clear here.
Just a moment, because Commissioner Johnson was asking to speak. I don't know if he has a question in the middle of your presentation. Brent, do you want to ask now?
Sure. Just a quick question. As part of the 50 to 100 analyses that West Yost performed, do they run sensitivities based on the status of the construction? For instance, are there any sensitivities of what if happens, we dig the hole, everyone gets hit by a bus and the project doesn't move forward? What happens then, or what types of sensitivities? Can you elaborate on that?
The modeling is very detailed, but at the end of the day, it's a best guess. It's a model. It's a guess as what's going to happen. What I can tell you is in 2016, well, let's go back. In 2006, in 2016, in 2017, and in 2018, I was out there up to my knees in water several times during those 3 years. There was no 100-year storm. I'm talking about a 10-year or less event, those streets flood. In the last 3 years, we had those streets closed a number of 6 times because of flooding. So the model is the model. What I'm telling you is, and I have spent, believe me, I have spent a lot of time, more time than anybody in here, other than Tim, talking to West Yost about flooding in Vacaville. It is very near and dear to me. And my concern here, again, is timing. And if we allow the grading to take place on the north end of the property, impeding the flow, or even giving the perception that we're impeding the flow through that project and worsening the situation in Southwood, we're going to have a problem, and that concerns me very much. As I said, the project is well-designed. It's going to handle the flooding and the drainage. It's doing exactly what we asked it to do. But the timing is what I'm concerned about.
Commissioner Fortney?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Vacaville's a better place because of what you and Tim are doing in regards to public works and keeping the residents safe over there, or in any neighborhood. I guess where I was going with this is if there is a plan before they grade or they start to grade and they bring you a plan that's approved by you, that yes, this would take the runoff, and fire's approved, whether it be fire hydrants, pressurized and whatever road that they require for that, why couldn't that language be added here? You still have the say, I don't see the city giving anything up. It's still protected. You still have the ultimate say to say, yes, this plan does work when they go vertical for water. I just don't see, I'm losing the disconnect of why we can't be flexible, because you're still, at the end of the day, approving a plan. That could have mitigated.
And again, I don't want to get in the weeds on this project because I'm not in the weeds on this project. The city engineer did a very good job of answering that question. And we don't, to be quite honest, I can't envision a plan that would satisfy that, to be very honest with you. And as Tim said, I don't want to stand up here and give the impression of the applicant that there's a silver bullet and he can bring in a plan and show me how he's going to mitigate this. And I think the time to have done that would have been before this meeting, which we asked for several times.
So do other commissioners want to address the director before we go on to other public comments? Okay,
Thank
and I
you.
wouldn't be surprised if we come back to this. At this point, I'm going to ask if other members of the public, since we've had the applicant have a chance, if other members of the public would like to come up and address the commission on this issue. And please state your name for the record.
My name's Dennis Kalis, commissioners and staff from the city of Vacaville. I had two concerns. I came in with one. After listening to everybody talk about flooding, I'm concerned about the second one. I live right off of Raleigh on Ramsey Drive, and I am concerned about the property on the other side flooding. Now, since we've lived there since '77, we've only had one occasion where the water got up to the curb and maybe a little bit over. So I wasn't concerned about flooding until I listened to you talk. Now I'm worried about this development impacting us maybe the wrong way and causing us to have flood insurance. We listened to the detention, how they explained the detention zone, and we listened to the pipes, listened to the speech about the pipes dissipating the water. But we didn't hear anything about where that water is going to go. Is it going to go back into the sewer that's already flooded? Where is it going to go? So it is a major impact to us. And if that detention zone doesn't cover the flooding, then it's going to put our side of the street, the south part of Alamo, in a flood zone. And that's going to greatly impact us. And they're going to be gone washing their hands of this project. So that concerns me. The second concern I have is at Raleigh, I understand there's going to be a sign that says right turn only. But nobody said anything about Beach Street right across from that intersection. That intersection has a lot of accidents occurring there because of the trees and the shrubbery that impacts the line of sight from the center divider. We have more development on Vanden Road and Leisure Town that causes an impact on Alamo and Peabody. But yet, the city hasn't said anything about traffic signals. No right turn sign isn't going to stop people from making a left-hand turn. You have no right-hand turn signs throughout this city. It hasn't stopped anybody. So a sign's not going to stop people at Raleigh and Alamo. The only thing that's going to slow traffic down there and have a major impact for the safety of those who live around there are signal lights. And I heard nothing said about signal lights.
Sir, I'm going to ask if the staff has a drawing of that area to show exactly the streets that are being talked about and what the plan is. And if I can get you to hold on here, and then Commissioner Johnson, I see you have a request.
My question is also for payment.
Okay, let me see if you can pull that up. and then I'll go to you, Commissioner Johnson.
So Beach is at the top of the commercial center, the yellow area, and right across is Raleigh Drive. So you have an ingress and an egress there on Beach at Alamo, but you only want to control traffic where the arrow is on the other side of the street. You're going to put a no right-hand turn sign there. No left-hand turn, okay?
So, Payman, I will ask, are those signs, are there physical separations? Can you run through on that, what the proposal is?
So the proposal, and no, we're going to have to go to Public Works. There would be signage, but also the concrete median would be extended to prohibit that left turn access.
Are you able to show on that where the concrete median extension will be?
Right here.
And is there one that comes down for the left turn from Alamo onto Peabody? Is that an existing, or would that be extended also?
So this is existing,
Okay,
and this is the proposed.
okay. So,
So there wouldn't be a way to turn left onto.
okay. So it's a physical barrier as well as a sign. Okay. Did that address your question?
That addresses the question. I'm just concerned about the impact now on Tulare.
Okay. And I want to now go to Commissioner Brent Johnson, who I think also had a question.
Yeah, I appreciate the question as well. I think, if one was really digging into this particular issue and referenced condition of approval number 50, it is a little ambiguous as to what actually is going to be done, and I understand the need for that because obviously there are a variety of different ways that you can restrict traffic, and I don't think we want to necessarily limit ourselves to one particular way. But I do see that condition number 50 addresses that particular item.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm confident that the applicant will work closely with I believe Public Works to make sure that they address that particular concern as well.
Thank you.
Nikolai.
Yeah, to this gentleman's other concern, I think what's kind of throwing you off is the fact that we're talking about outside of the property and what's going on and mitigating this, mitigating that. The reason for this detention basin, and correct me if I'm wrong, city staff, is to totally mitigate any runoff that this project would cause by building the basin. So by them building this project and building the basin and the stringent requirements that they're putting on there should be absolutely no effect, and correct me if I'm wrong, to this gentleman's property over on Raleigh. That anything that this property causes will not leave this property site based on the drainage and the basin, correct?
And I'm going to ask a staff member to come up and answer that on the record.
Yeah, you're correct in that what they're mitigating is to make sure that they are not causing any problems to any other surrounding development
Yeah.
once the project is built.
Yeah, I think what's kind of throwing folks off is now that we're talking of outside the project and the floodplain and all these other things, this detention basin is built for this project. It's not being built to lower anybody's flood insurance or cause any issues. It's being built to mitigate any issue so that no one has any problem with this property being developed.
It's to you're right.
Yeah.
It's to mitigate these issues that the property is now, once it's developed, it's going to have a little bit higher runoff, and the detention basin would mitigate that to a precondition.
Yeah, and so at worst case, you should be exactly the same. At best case, there may be some improvement.
Thanks.
Are there other members of the public who would like to come up? Again, please state your name for the record when you come to the podium.
Good evening, Planning Commission, staff and public. My name is Roberto Valdez, and I've lived in that, very close to that area. I live on Creekside, which is more toward Alamo and Nut Tree Road. and not quite, almost halfway from this project. And of course, I'm here because I'm concerned about it. In hindsight, I will tell you very clearly, I wish that McDonald's had built their big operation over at, that's now over by the corner of Nut Tree and Alamo Drive, because of the impact it's had on the parking there, because of the, especially in weekends and, rush hours when people want to eat, and everybody wants to eat almost at the same time, And I don't question that, it's human nature. But the thing is that I'm here because, of course, I'm concerned about the, one of the things I'm really concerned about is the impact to the traffic congestion there. It's a very heavily used road, Alamo Drive and Tulare, and during rush hours, during work hours, almost throughout the whole day, you really have to look into that, the impact, and not just follow what the process, but really try to look between the roads or between the lines of the report that you're going to get about you're saying there's no impact, whatever, I'm questioning that. Especially on Alamo Drive, there's a lot of residents over there. I have nothing against people living there. I don't have anybody living in Vacaville, outside or inside the city. But we have to look at it, and if you really are here with a public trust that you were appointed by the city council, then you really need to look at that. The other thing, I will tell you that as far as the commercial building there, and I have to tell you honestly, I missed all the presentation tonight, so I'm hoping to have another opportunity based on my schedule, tight schedule, to go to the city council and tell them if you approve this project. But the other thing, as when you're talking about another commercial building, you should realize right now there are buildings within that complex that are empty. There was a fitness center there, big building, and that's empty now. I don't know why. I just discovered that 2 days ago. And so, so I guess I don't get the rationale why you should really push people, if anything, to occupy those buildings. An empty building doesn't do anybody any good. And I can tell you that area can be very isolated, and who knows what happens during the night or even during the day, I don't have any police reports to share with you or anything like that. Don't want to. But the other thing, the detention base, I'm not sure. I heard you say just a while ago that it's to mitigate the runoff from those buildings being built there. It's been flooded. As far as I remember, in 2005, you can look at your records. December 31st, 2000? I'll never forget that day in Vacaville. You couldn't even go to work. I couldn't even go to work in Oakland, and it was awful. And a lot of those roads get flooded very easily. So, ask me, I'd rather you leave that property alone. Build a park, something else that people can really have some rest. We don't need more buildings. We need open spaces. We need people to find peace and rest and recreation, especially in our very tense times. I don't have to remind you that what's going on today, both at the national and state, So, if you're aware and you care the public trust, I think you would, and I'm not really supporting this project at the moment, unless I hear otherwise, then, and I'm glad to hear that the residents of that area are coming in, expressing their views, because we're living with that building. We're going to be living with that. You may not be living with, you may not be from that area. But we see it every day. I see it every day. Alamo and Tulare, So you would have been horrified when you saw Tulare. A lot of people almost lost their homes there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valdez. Are there other members of the public who would like to come up and address the commission? Please come forward, and again, please state your name for the record.
Hello, Tom Sorensen. I'm a resident on Catalpa Lane, directly east of the detention basin, retention basin. I've been communicating via email with Payman. I wanted to get some clarification. He said that there was going to be, the builder would provide a perimeter fence around the project. And originally, they said they would either replace or build a wood fence. To me, a wood fence has a average lifespan of 5 to 10 years, 15 if it's totally dry conditions. So I think a wood fence would be inappropriate. Something with masonry, cinder blocks, I think would be better.
Let me go ahead and ask staff to address that right now. What are the fencing requirements?
So, and I apologize, I tried to send this information to Mrs. Sorensen, but it didn't get through. Condition number 8 requires a masonry wall when the commercial site develops. And that's really going to depend on what sort of commercial facility it is. We're looking at a minimum. It could be a taller fence depending on, again, what specific business it is, but we're anticipating that it would be a 6-foot tall masonry fence.
Thank you, Mr. Pavon.
Excellent. I had another question. I don't know who this would be addressed to, possibly the owners of the property. Last spring and again yesterday, there was landscape-type personnel out there spraying chemicals. I'm assuming these was for weed control, and I'd be curious what those chemicals are.
And since that's not normally something that would be one of our conditions of approval, while I'd ask the owners to speak with you afterwards, I'm not going to ask for that here just because it doesn't fit into our normal conditions of approval. But I will ask the owners to speak with the gentleman, if you can, offline, so you can talk about what's done there. Okay, great. And if you guys can talk separately, that would be much appreciated. Are there other members of the public who would like to come up and speak to the commission? I don't see anyone else. I do see someone else getting up. Go ahead and please state your name for the record.
My name is Esther Kalis, and I live over on Ramsey Drive. I'm just here tonight to express that I am adamantly opposed to any more commercial on that property. We moved up here in '77. A few years after that, Gaspar showed up, and he wanted to put a Kmart over there. I fought that, but they did give him an 8-acre parcel to match up with the 8-acre commercial parcel on the other side of the street. A few years later, he came back. He got it bumped up to 10, and now he's back again. The traffic on those streets are horrendous. Adding more commercial on there is just going to make it worse, especially coming in and out of that commercial property. And I just don't think it's fair and right to the people who are already here to keep giving him what he wants. The other thing I wanted to ask about is they're saying the Beach Street off-site parking would accommodate all of the, for the commercial. Beach Street's not even there. I'm assuming that they're going to cut Beach Street through, and it's going to be mostly on their property, which means it's not going to be on Beach Street. It's going to be on Capitola, and I drove through there today. They hardly have any parking on that street now. How are they going to pick up the overload from that commercial property?
Mr. Pavon, can you point out where Beach Street and I believe Capitola are on the overhead?
Well, Beach Lane is the street that you see right through the middle of the site. It's the L-shaped street. And it's a public street, and parking is allowed on public streets for residential or commercial uses. It would be a public street. It is, at this point, Beach Lane is, like I said, it's been cut off for a number of decades, and this would connect it to Alamo in the way that it's shown on the site plan.
But Beach Street is mostly going to be within that property. Can you show me on the map where Beach Street is? Because when I drove through on Capitola, which is where Beach Street is cut off, it goes right into the property. There's no other Beach Street over there.
I understand. Beach cuts off right here. Right now, Beach Lane cuts off right at the bottom here. The proposal is to create a new public street in this way that connects to Alamo.
I don't see it.
It's this. This would be a public street. It wouldn't be privately held. It would be a public street. No, it goes into Alamo.
Commissioner Aldridge?
So that would take some traffic off the corner where the stoplight is on Tulare and Alamo, because you could make a right-hand turn off Tulare and go down Beach Street and make the curve and come out in front of the commercial property and back onto Alamo, correct? No?
I'm not quite following that.
So I want to make sure that all this discussion is on the mic. I'm going to
So-
ask Payman, do you have a map that you can zoom out a little
Sure,
bit so we can see all these streets that we're talking about?
I was looking at the street that said Public Street. It didn't have a name on it.
So Public Street is basically, it's the extension of Beach Lane. So Beach Lane is right here. Whoops, go over here. Catalpa's right here,
Okay.
and this is Beach Lane. Beach
Oh.
Lane is going to be extended through the site to Alamo.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but you're talking about off-site. Beach, you mean because it goes through the property, it's considered off-site? There's no place off-site for parking on beach.
Well,
not there
Beach
yet.
Street is a public street, and you can park on a public street.
Yeah, within the property.
Well, it would be a public street. It's a public street. It would
So
not be.
because it's a public street, they call it off-property?
Yes, because it would be on-street parking.
And Payman, let me see if I can understand what you're talking about properly, and then Commissioner Johnson has a request to speak. So when you talk about the commercial property, that thin strip along
It would
what
be-
is right down there where you're showing, the parking that's not there, those patrons that aren't parking on the commercial parcel would be able to park on the extension of Beach Lane that comes through the green site that is shown there, because Beach Lane would be a public street, and therefore public parking would be allowed there.
That's correct.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure I understood that properly. Commissioner Brent Johnson.
Did that help?
Yes, as far as the parking goes.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like just from the larger aerial is helpful for understanding, I think. It looks like when this whole neighborhood was built, Catalpa was there, and Beach Lane looks like it was stopped with the idea that it would eventually go through this property. And I think what this project plan is showing that Beach Lane now is going to go through this property, which was, and I don't know if anyone has the answer when this particular neighborhood was built, but I would imagine that that was the intent. And I think this project is now achieving that.
Do we have other members of the public who would like to come up and address the commission before we close the public hearing? I don't see anybody, so I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing. Commissioners, now is our time to ask any last questions, to give our thoughts on the project, and ultimately to come up with a motion. Since I don't see anybody jumping up to speak right now, I do want to say a couple of impressions that I have. First, I think the design is a good one, and I'm happy to see the three-story structures that we have here. I think we'll see more of those in Vacaville in the future, so something that has a good exterior design is important at this point, and I think that the exterior design is good. I like the match between the clubhouse and the commercial property that is out front. And I'm one of the things that I see that our last couple of speakers talked about is the impact of when you have infill development. Anytime you have infill, you hear concerns about it's bringing more traffic to the area, and what are the impacts on the existing residents. And yet, for example, Mr. Valdez and I have had discussions in the past where we advocate for infill development because that reduces the pressure for building on the green fields east of town. And unfortunately, I don't think you can have it both ways, where you oppose exterior development and yet you oppose infill development. And I think this is one of those where we have actually a good infill project for the layout, for the design of the buildings, and all those things. I think since it's at the lower end of the zoning, and the zoning clearly anticipates and desires a mix of uses like this, the new commercial there is something that is very easy for these residents to walk through. It actually reduces some of the traffic pressures throughout the city and in the area because people who live there can walk to whether it's coffee or whatever they get there, rather than the typical, I need to drive to wherever I'm going. So I like the use, I like the mix of uses, I like the design. We'll have to figure out what we want to do about any wording on the drainage, but I generally like the project. So that's my opinion, and I would like to hear what other commission members, if any of them. Commissioner Beaumont, go ahead.
Yeah, infill is hard to fill correctly. I mean, you know, it's hard in the middle of the city, especially in a flood zone. So I think this has been done very well. I think the type of housing is something we haven't seen in 20 and 30 years in Vacaville. So it's a different style, it's a different cost structure that would be probably better than the high end that we've been building on the east side of Leisure Town. So I'm basically for it. I think it's a nice design. It looks nice, well planned out, and hopefully that detention basin is as good as the 50 strokes that Tom did with the models. We'll find out, but I'm generally for it. I like it. Thank you.
Commissioner Alan Johnson.
I just wanted to say that I agree with my fellow commissioners. I love the project. It's a good design. We have a need for housing in Vacaville. That's something that we are charged with to get our arena numbers, to get appropriate mixed housing for different levels of our community. And also, I just wanted to mention one thing that I think Mr. Philippi might have said, maybe nobody caught. The detention basin is not the only flood mitigation part of this project. From our reading my agenda package, you can tell that the streets were designed. There's swales, I believe is the right terminology, along the back of the property to help carry water to that detention basin. So, you know, this is a good project for this property, it's a good project for the neighborhood, and it's a good project for Vacaville.
Commissioner Nicolai?
Yeah, I've been on the commission a while, and we have spent many hours looking at this particular property, and it has taken a number of iterations over the years. I think this is a great use for the project. I think this is the best iteration that I've seen. I'm very happy, you know, with the project as it's drawn up. I'm very happy with the fact that it's going to be a part of that neighborhood instead of a vacant lot that really is doing nobody any good. So I totally support the project. I commend Mr. Gaspar for hanging in with the city over the years. He has kind of taken the brunt of a lot of those iterations, and I think he's made the best of it, and I'm very happy to vote yes for this particular project.
Commissioner Aldrich?
Well, Commissioner Nicolai just stole my thunder, but that's okay. I have also been on the commission for a number of years and know the Gaspars and have been through multiple projects or drawings and so on of things that we have looked at, and I think this is a great use of this land. I think it's giving Vacaville some housing that we desperately need, and I'm all for it.
You could have simply said what he said and go Niners, and we would have been fine.
Oh, stop it.
There is a piece of correspondence we received. It's an email that went to the city council members and asked if there are any affordable housing units. So, question for Mr. Brierly, are any of these legally considered affordable as opposed to, it's probably more affordable than most of the rest of the stuff in the city. So how is affordability addressed? And then after that, we'll go to Commissioner Johnson.
So the applicant has not proposed that any of the units be deed restricted affordable housing.
Brett Johnson.
Yeah, just a couple comments. I think the project is well designed. I think the development team did a good job. I would definitely be remiss if I did not mention that I do have doubts about the economic viability of this as a for-sale product. There is a reason that this type of project has not been developed in Solano County this real estate cycle, and it's a cost-revenue equation. So I do have concerns about that. I know there are backup plans in place to address that, which, gives me confidence. I wish that this moves forward, and I hope that it is a successful project. We move forward to kind of voting on this, I do want to open up the discussion for amending any of the conditions as they're currently written and explore alternatives. So if Chair McCauley, we could start that.
For the sake of process, then, I'll ask if either Commissioner Johnson or Fortney has specific language they would like to propose to condition of approval 66B. Once we deal with that, we can deal with the overall project. So unless any commissioners disagree with that approach, I think under the Rosenberg's Rules of Orders, it's a practical way to get things done.
Okay.
So do you have recommended wording?
So for B, I would propose something along the lines of the basin shall be constructed concurrently with the construction of Phase 1 improvements and shall be operational at the earlier of a date certain, which would be determined by Public Works, or the certificate of occupancy.
So just to make sure we have that recorded properly, that would be after shall be operational at the earlier of a date specified by the Director of Public Works, or what was the second portion of that?
The certificate of, any certificate of occupancy being issued.
So put in C of O rather than building permits, okay? Okay, and I'm just trying to make sure I have that right. So Commissioner Fortney, since you were talking on this, does that also tend to meet what your interests
Yeah,
are?
I still think we have to have wording in there that the plan is submitted to Public Works for approval from Public Works and Fire.
Okay. Other commissioners with input, Commissioner Nicolai.
Does that mean then, or does that language mean that Public Works would have the final say? Because that's the thing that, until the certificate of occupancy, I would think that nothing should be done until these guys that are the experts say, yes, let's go ahead and do that. Is that what that means?
Well, just to expand on that, and maybe staff could clarify, I think by way of the improvement plan process, they're not issuing grading permits until the improvement plans, which ostensibly this detention basin is a part of. They would have to, before the grading permit is even issued, they would have to have approved this detention basin plan as part of the improvement plans. So that left us really,
So
what do we do?
yeah, it's we have your proposal, and I'm going to ask: is there any commission member who wants to second Commissioner Johnson's wording on that?
Yes, I'll second.
Okay, so we have a proposal and a second for the wording that is at the earlier date of a date specific approved by the Director of Public Works or prior to the issuance of any certificate of occupancy.
So it does mean then, in answer to my question, that nothing would proceed without their okay. It would mean that there's the possibility that this could go earlier if they deemed it acceptable. Correct?
One of the reasons I'm going to have a little trouble supporting that is because I think it's too unclear for the dates. But before I jump in too much, I want to give all the other commissioners a chance to jump in. And we have a motion to second. I'm looking to see, do we have support for going forward with that? Commissioners, I need to hear your opinions.
I can revise it.
Okay, hold on for a sec. I see. I'm going to ask the other commissioners to weigh in quickly. Commissioner, thought I was approving Commissioner Beaumont.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Beaumont, go ahead.
Yeah, I just assumed it'd be more restrictive, that the basin has to be built to protect the homeowners around the area if there's some flooding happening when they're in the grading process. And if you get rains, I want the water to be able to be protective of the other lots around that acreage. So if we're delaying the fact that they have to build the basin, I'm not for that. I want that to be in the first phase of the construction, in my opinion.
Commissioner Aldrich?
I agree with Commissioner Beaumont. I think the detention basin is very important before anything else is built to protect anybody else around there, because if they start building the townhouses, then that water won't have anywhere to go. So I agree that the phase should be what the Public Works says it should be to protect everyone in the city.
Commissioner Johnson, if I can, I'm going to ask if I can propose some slightly alternative language.
If I can just clarify.
Okay, then go ahead, and then I'll see if I
Sounds
can.
like Commissioner Beaumont and Aldridge may have misinterpreted what I am intending, and that is not to take this out of Phase 1 construction. It is to simply not limit the business plan of the developer and in an effort to make this plan more financially viable by increasing the time at which they're able to pull their model building permits. And for those in the audience that are not as familiar with the process, all of that sequentially usually takes a lot longer. You do your improvements, you begin your models, you start selling. Once your models are up and running, you start selling, and then you start building production homes. If you're able to start your model homes earlier, you're able to execute on your business plan earlier, and that just makes it a more financially viable project. And so I'm coming from that perspective. It does not necessarily mean that I devalue the completion of the detention basin. I 100% agree that this is the way to solve the drainage issues. But I do think that there is an alternative that allows the detention basin to get constructed in a sequential order that still allows the applicant to be successful in executing on their business plan. And so that's where I'm coming from. And by conditioning it to the certificate of occupancy, that means that nobody would be able to move into any of the properties or occupy any of those properties until the detention basin is complete.
And I know Mr. Cunningham talked about timing in his presentations also. Would it work to, for example, modify it, say, the Public Works Director may approve an alternative detention plan that does not result in any stormwater harm, for lack of a better phrase right now, to adjoining properties, with the idea, because you brought up very well the question of, for example, model homes, that if the applicant wanted to come in and say, well, I can dig down a certain amount on the detention basin right now, build my model homes, and then finish the basin as I'm seeking building permits for the remaining homes, that sort of thing where the director may approve gives them the flexibility. I think Commissioner Portnoy was talking about that, where it now lets you work on, for example, a phased plan if the developer can come up with a phased plan that the Director of Public Works approves, understanding that at least from the Commission's point of view, we encourage the Director of Public Works to be flexible in the timing on something like that. Ultimately, the City Council gives him directions, we give suggestions. It gives him suggestions to be flexible on what may be a phased plan so long as it sees no harm. So that was a long explanation.
Yep, no,
the wording would be alternative detention plan that results in no harm to the existing surrounding properties. Would that meet your desires?
Sure.
Okay, Commissioner Fortney, was that kind of the idea you had?
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Nicolai had a request, and then Commissioner Beaumont to speak.
Now, I would support that, because what it's doing is answering the question that I posed. These gentlemen would still have the final say, and that nothing would be done without them saying, we're going to go forward. What it does is it allows the development to move forward as you guys are proposing, but you still have the final say. Now, that doesn't put you guys on any kind of a slippery slope, does it? Public Works? I mean, I'd be interested in hearing that.
So I want to hear from the other commissioners real quick, but then we will specifically ask the Director of Public Works to come back.
I think before I would want to vote on something like that, I'd like to hear from them saying, this is not going to put me on a slippery slope or cause this problem or that problem.
Well, let me ask a couple of other commissioners to speak, and then we'll ask Mr. Cunningham to come up. Commissioner Beaumont.
My only comment would be, since it's in the conditions now, obviously the gas bars accepted it, and they felt their model fit well enough to do it that way. So that would be my only comment of changing it.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Fortney.
I think you're headed down the right path with some flexibility. My only concern is that we may look at a timeframe to have this plan approved between the applicant and Public Works and Fire. I know that puts some constraints on you, but we don't want to be at the same boat as we are with nothing ever getting approved. Not a condition that it has to be approved.
So at this point, I'm going to ask Mr. Cunningham to come up and address this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess it goes without saying, I kind of like the condition the way it was written myself. But since we're talking about changing it, to address Mr. Johnson's proposed language, the concern we have with that, you know, if we were going to say the earlier of a date certain or occupancy, the problem we have with that, I would tend to say, okay, well, assuming the applicant wants to start construction in the spring, I'd say, well, I can tell you right now, my date certain is going to be October 15th of this year, that the basin be in place, or occupancy of the first unit if it happens before that, right? The problem with that is, how do I enforce it? So as soon as we've issued building permits and we've issued grading permits and they're able to begin work, and now that date rolls around and for whatever reason the project's stalled, how do I enforce that? How do I make them go out and build that basin and get it operational? The answer is you can't. And that's the same problem we have with occupancy. Tying anything to occupancy, that's the example I always use is, now if we tie it to building permit, I'm inconveniencing the applicant who can control their destiny. If I tie it to occupancy, now I'm inconveniencing the family that just moved from San Francisco and has the moving truck in front of the house and wants to move in, and we're saying Public Works is being inflexible and not letting them move in. So we want to avoid that. So I do like, Bob, I like your better. If I had to change the language, I like what you're saying, which I think, Mike, is what you were talking about, is kind of saying, okay, can we basically leave the language the way it is with an alternative that if the applicant comes in and convinces the city engineer that they do have a way to commence work without having the basin operational, then there is a potential that we could approve that. And I would want to be able to, make it clear that, or not, right? So that if they convince us that they have a plan that'll work,
And
we could
before
go
you
down
go,
that
Commissioner
road,
Johnson
or
and
not.
Portnoy both wish to speak, so Brent?
Yeah, just one quick comment. I disagree in part to what you said. The inconvenience on the developer at building permit is not necessarily true. The true inconvenience is not being able to close a home that you sell, because you have invested many hundreds of thousands of dollars to construct that home already, and you can't monetize that investment until you're able to close it with the home buyer. And so conditioning the detention basin to that trigger would be the true inconvenience, if that's what we're looking to do.
I don't disagree with that, but it also brings in another party that's inconvenienced. That is the person that was expecting the house to close and for them to move
All the
in.
more reason that they should be incentivized to get it completed.
Commissioner Fortney.
After this evening, when is this scheduled for council? How much time?
We are tentatively looking at February 25th.
So is there an opportunity for us to approve this and authorize staff to meet back with the applicant, produce a plan or put a plan together? Yeah, can we ask the applicant to come up? Possibly put a plan together that you guys would then present, that everyone agrees for when council approves this?
So go ahead.
We hear and respect Public Works requests. And A solution that gives them full and absolute discretion would be, after the way it's written, say, unless an alternative phasing storm management plan is approved by the Director of Public Works in their sole and absolute discretion. That allows the flexibility. All we're asking is that we have the right to come in and show that we can make a plan work, and if it does, that they work with us.
So I'll ask first, Mr. Barley, did you get a good record of what the applicant said? Because I think he stated it more eloquently than I did. And if not, can you write that down and please hand it to Director Brierly?
Yes, I could.
But Sean, that language?
Okay, so we have, the Director of Public Works said, I think that's a good compromise, and I want to make sure what we have is on the record. We have two more commissioners that want to speak. Mike, if you can turn yours off, go back to, forgot what he was going to say, but Mr. Barley Mr. Barley forgot what he wanted to say, or you would like to speak? Go ahead, Barton.
I was just going to respond. The beauty of having it recorded is we've got it recorded.
Okay, so we have it recorded, but please provide the written version anyway, because I think that most clearly said what we wanted. Commissioner Nicolai.
Yeah, and just based on that, I would support it based on what was just said as well. So I'd be willing to vote yes for that.
So I think we have a
You guys are.
consensus on 66B, which now I'll ask for a motion on the entire project, including the amended 66B. Who would like to make that
We have
motion?
a motion on the floor.
We don't. We were only talking about 66B
Oh.
before we talk about the entire project. So would someone like to make that motion? Would someone like to make that motion? Commissioner Aldrich.
I will make that motion if I don't have to repeat it, if I can say what has already been spoken.
So I think it would
By
be fair to
Patrick.
say the recommendation is the staff recommendation as modified. Okay.
Correct.
And the city attorney has the language in front of her, and the director does. So it's the project as recommended in the staff report with the modified wording that has been provided by the applicant to the Director of Community Development. Did I
That's the-
properly state?
That's the motion I want to
Okay.
make.
Do we have a second to that?
I second.
Okay, we have a second, Commissioner Alan Johnson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Passes unanimously. Director Brierly, can we have a status report, please?
So the commission's decision is a recommendation to the city council. This will go to the city council, and payment is the date February 11th, or is it February 25th?
I think it's the first meeting. I just know the staff report's due Friday, so.
Okay, so it's tentatively scheduled for February 11th city council meeting.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to ask for a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for the development code, but 5-minute break.
See you, Tom.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you
Thanks,
take
Tom.
your seats,
I'll
we're going to
I'll get my
get
brick
ourselves
ordered.
going again.
Take care.
Did you guys buy a brick for the Playfall Park?
I have not.
I'm buying brick.
Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Johnson?
You know, we know you love to stay up all night, but could you please sit down so we can get moving? Yes, sir. Take your time.
Yeah, we don't have anybody left. I did.
The Planning Commission meeting is called back to order. Our next item is item number 8, business items. 8A is Land Use and Development Code update. Mr. Badera, you are listed as the primary presenter, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So this item is the Land Use and Development Code update, the next module or section of Land Use Code, preliminary draft Land Use Code amendments that are proposed. I'm joined tonight by Susan DeCarli and Roger Eastman from the firm of Lisa Wise Consulting. They're our consulting firm for the preparation of the code update. They've presented modules of the code update language to you in previous meetings. Tonight's section will deal with the topics of resource protection standards and the subdivision ordinance. So these are the sections in the case of resource protection that talk about habitat protection, tree preservation standards, oak woodland protection, which is a new item added into the general plan, and other habitat related items. The subdivision ordinance sets out the procedures for the processing of different kinds of subdivisions, most of which the Planning Commission is the decision-making authority under the city's existing code. And so they're going to do a presentation on how we've drafted the current section and ask for any comments and questions from the commissioners. One thing I would say, so this is I think the 4th or 5th section of the code update that we've brought to you. There's still one more that will be coming to you in probably the March hearing. And once we're done with that, we will be compiling all of those sections together into a complete copy of the draft code update, bringing it back through a public review, giving people a chance to go back and re-review what we've done over the past several months, and hopefully produce a very good document for the community. So with that, let's see, Roger and Susan are going to be presenting this for you. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, great to see you again. Happy New Year. It was December last time I was here. I'm Roger Eastman with Lisa Wise Consulting, a director. Susan DeCarli is here with me as well. Both of us, as we said last time, come with many years of local government experience. I've got over 25 years, Susan over 20 years in California working with subdivisions and resources. So she'll be guiding you through the presentation. If we can have the next slide, Susan. I was going to go back to why are we here? I think now that we've done this 5 times, this is the 5th module, you probably know we are updating your land development code. So I don't think I really need to go through the process for it. Fred covered very eloquently that we're here to specifically talk about resource protection and subdivisions. Next slide, Susan. And we all clearly understand, I think, the purpose of the code update, so we can deliver through the Commission ultimately to the City Council a code that's clear, concise, understandable, easy to use, and implements the general plan. Next slide. The time frame that we're working on is lengthy. We started in November of 2018. We're here now in January of 2020. The administration and procedures and permit section will come to you probably in March, as Fred indicated, and then we'll get into creating the public review draft, and we'll be back before you for public hearings. Susan? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Susan, and she'll take you through the resource protection standards and then the subdivision regulations. And of course, we're here to hear from you, get guidance and direction from you and any members of the public who may be hanging out with us. So thank you.
Aha. Thank you, and good evening. Susan DeCarli with Lisa Weiss Consulting. I'll be providing an outline of the updated chapters on the code on resource protection and subdivisions. I want to note up front that you'll see in the draft text that in both the chapters, there's areas that are highlighted in yellow. These indicates areas where we intentionally identified information that would benefit from input from the public, the commission, and areas where we intend to have further conversations with staff to dial in the best way to approach different subject matters and preferred practices for implementation. There was a goal to keep this project on schedule, and between the last hearing on the prior module and this one over the holidays, that was a little tricky with vacations and time off and so forth. So we did our best to bring you as complete chapters as we could, but we do have areas where we do still intend to come back and work on them. And I'll circle back with the commission on areas we suggest for input towards the end of this presentation, and of course listen to your input and on anything else that needs to be addressed. So, I'm talking a little bit about the resource protection chapter. Providing a place in the code on issues of resource protection makes a lot of sense. As part of the general public project review and environmental review process, the CEQA process, it's helpful to be aware of the unique environmental resources on a project and also the special processes necessary to comply with a range of issues. This section includes environmental directives from the general plan and other city ordinances and resolutions that are relevant to development in the city. This is wise to have them all in one place and kind of unique, actually, for a community to have all the natural resource issues that are most important to the community in one location in a code versus in these separate ordinances and resolutions, sometimes just in a planner's head. That they're we have to recite them each time we talk to a new developer. And so it's nice to have them in one place where you won't miss it. This section is great to have as a starting point for development so they know what's going to be expected from the get-go. In regard to resource protection, it's important to know what may apply to property, such as property with vernal pools that may need repetitive, seasonally timed surveys and studies, which affects timelines, resources needed to see a project through. There may be a myriad of regulations from various agencies at all levels that require compliance prior to project approval, including local, regional, importantly in this area, the Habitat Conservation Plan, the HCP, that's still in draft form by Solano County, and state and federal agencies. It's also really, I just want to step back for a second and note under resource protection that it's not really practical to have the entire universe of all measures that may apply to a development to avoid, reduce, and mitigate impacts, since the range of resources can be very site-specific and need to be determined through very specialized special studies. Therefore, we included in the code a listing of the processes that may apply to a project. Because initially, I believe when we first scoped this project out, we were anticipating providing a thorough list of potential mitigations, but really those are dialed in project by project. So just wanted to kind of put that out there. So in regard to resource protection in wildlife and community resource areas, Vacaville is blessed with a range of natural resource areas. The general plan and the Solano HCP identify 4 major natural communities that require special processes and may include unique resource protection. These include valley floor grassland and vernal pools, the Intercoast Range, riparian stream and freshwater marsh areas, and agricultural land. Each natural area is identified on a natural community boundaries map to inform the development community and decision makers that certain properties within those boundaries may have special resources that require protection or mitigation, which again would be identified through site-specific studies. In regard to general biological resources, once after identifying wildlife and community resource areas for protection, the chapter provides general thresholds for when biological resource studies may be needed. Basically, if a project is located in one of the natural resource areas, those 4 areas just noted, is 5 acres or larger and or contains habitat resources or protected species, and is not otherwise exempt from, there's a classification in the California Environmental Quality Act called Class 32. If it's not exempt under that section of the code, a biological resource study would be required. And this is good, this is helpful for developers to know upfront, so that when they're going through the things they may need to think about, the costs anticipated, the times anticipated, that they know what they're getting into when they have a project for development. The section goes on to identify supplemental submittal requirements for these types of studies, including the different types of surveys required, which are aimed at ensuring that folks know what they're going to need to comply with, such as the HCP, CEQA, and potentially NEPA when they go into the process. In regard to creeks and riparian areas, this section and the next couple resource topics, oak woodlands and savanna areas and tree protection, are brought forward from current city regulations. Having them all in one place makes it easy to use and convenient for implementation. This section on creeks and riparian areas provides information on where regulations apply, creek setbacks and how to measure them, activities that may be allowed in setback areas, and those that are prohibited. Avoidance, reduction of impacts and mitigation measures are typically identified through special studies and through the environmental review process. In regard to oak woodland and savanna habitats, the goal of these regulations is to support the community goal of protecting loss of oak woodlands and savanna habitats. Similar to protection of creeks and riparian areas, methods to reduce and mitigate impacts are identified through site-specific studies. However, in this case, the city has established measures such as clustering development and a preservation ratio of 3:1, preserving habitats of 3 acres to each 1 acre impacted by disturbance. The regulations also carry forward and identify long-term management, maintenance, and monitoring requirements. In regard to tree preservation, regulations that pertain to tree preservation are also carried forward from existing city regulations. These include when tree preservation is required, permit requirements for removal, exemptions, permit requirements, replacement requirements, protection during construction, and consequences for unauthorized tree removals. In regard to some of those highlighted areas, some that we felt the Commission may specifically want to weigh in on tonight or provide some feedback on include the general plan identifies special status bat species as an issue to include in your regulations. This is kind of unique to have a myriad of different types of natural resources to focus in on one specific protected species, which is fine, but we didn't know if perhaps the Commission may want to consider the level of detail of there's, I believe, 3 sections of regulations that follow the general broad category of special status bat species in there. Also, the mapping of those 4 natural community areas is from a very high level. And while it's good to have a general kind of thumb point of where property may have these types of resources, they may also need to be dialed in through special studies, special surveys. We wanted to highlight this to you to see if there were other ways or ideas you have on how to make those more usable and more usable and more helpful.
Hold on for a moment, because Commissioner Beaumont apparently wishes to speak.
Yeah, is there some reason that the bat status came up by itself as a special status?
So I'm going to defer to Fred.
It came up during the preparation of the general plan EIR, and during those reviews, the biological resources, there were new identification of new bat species that were special status species that required protection, and the city had no adopted methods for dealing with that. So it was a relatively new topic. We have a lot of detail in that general plan EIR, which was carried forward as directives in the general plan update to adopt measures to protect this species, similar to what you see a lot of times for, say, the Swainson's hawk and the burrowing owl. We have those. So what we found, though, as Susan was mentioning, looking at language for a code, the language we've got in the general plan EIR is very, very detailed as far as how you go about protecting these species. Typically, in our code sections, we adopt less specific language because we get those standards usually issued to us from the resource agencies at the state level. And their standards change over time, and so often in the code language, you might not want to be exactly verbatim what they say. You may just adopt a code that says follow the adopted standard provided by the state agency, so that as they change their methods over time, you don't have to go back and amend the code each time they modify some language. And so that's one of the reasons we highlighted this one. As we looked at that and thought about code language, we felt that, well, maybe we can investigate different ways of saying it in the code that would appropriately carry forward the general plan's directive to have measures adopted in our development procedures to protect the species as required, but do it in a way that wouldn't cause us to have to go back and go through a code amendment if and when the state adopts a modified method of protecting the animals. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead and proceed. Wait, Commissioner Johnson, Alan Johnson.
I'll interject it while we're talking about it. You mentioned that the state may change their methods of dealing with certain protected species, but by that same token, they also change species that are protected versus not protected based on the situation that arises. So wouldn't a more general verbiage in our code, like you suggest, to not only allow for different methods, different codes for dealing with specific things, a more general terminology to deal with the what-ifs, so we didn't have to come back and amend the code every time a different cricket is identified as protected, or just my thoughts.
I think we're mixing our sporting metaphors between bats and crickets, but go ahead, Fred.
Well, it is interesting, as Commissioner Beaumont mentioned, that it's the bat specifically that we're talking about, but it really applies to all different species which have been identified or may be identified.
Right. So I think that's correct, and so we do want to look at that carefully as we, try and prepare some final wording in there, and that's why that's been highlighted at this point, and just make sure we have the best process. Again, also making it easier for someone who's using the code to use it, and if we can get that dialed in appropriately, I think it'll be a better document.
And I think the two of you had it right, that you don't want to call out every single species, because then something's added, have to go back and rewrite it. There are, you said, a few very specific ones: Swainson's hawk, Berwyn owl, valley elderberry, longhorn beetle. We probably do need to make a point of calling out, but we should, other than that, have general language unless we know something that it shows up every time, and we just have to push it up front so that people are aware of it. But yeah, let's not try and list every single species that might show up. No, proceed.
All righty. So the next topic is on tree protection. Tree protection regulations in the code are also brought forward from the existing codes. However, the commission or public may wish to discuss or revisit tree protection policies related to removal criteria, implementation of protection or mitigation requirements for trees impacted or removed associated with private development, and application of regulations for public projects on public property. The commission may also want to discuss if there should be a difference between preservation or mitigation requirements for impacts to naturally occurring trees versus trees that are planted, or application of different standards for different types of trees, or for trees that are located on infill existing developed properties. So for instance, if someone has a tree in their front yard that's tearing up the sidewalk or something and they need to remove it, versus greenfield development where they could potentially work around a tree, should we have different standards for different types of circumstances? So those are things that we're still going to be having additional conversation about. And if you have direction on or thoughts you want to share with us, we'd certainly appreciate it. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about subdivisions. I'll say this, that our goal with this section, which applies to the dividing and merging of land, is really to help make it clear, easier to use, and just kind of simplify the section. We took a lighter touch to it than to natural resources. Again, just to, with a goal of trying to make it simpler to use. We know that the city has some established processes. We may want to help define those more clearly. In this area of the code, the subdivision map act really supersedes or establishes the framework from which we work in. And so the types of maps to submit, those are in the subdivision map act. We're not going to change any of that. But we took our best shot at trying to identify ways to kind of help make this section easier to use. We looked at other communities and the way they process their development, their subdivision maps, and threw in perhaps more information than may be necessary. Your city engineer is certainly very close to how the functions of the subdivision processes work here with your planning staff, and we do need to have further conversations with both of them before this section is finalized. Just wanted to kind of put that out there. Again, we haven't had a lot of time to really have a lot of back and forth on that subject. This chapter establishes the procedures and submittal requirements for different types of subdivision applications. We made suggestions on the level of content to include in submittal requirements. We may want to pull back on some of the lists of submittal requirements and just cross-reference them to the Subdivision Map Act or to application checklists that the department already has. Again, we'll work through that. But this section includes discussion on the applicability of the regulations, consistency with city policies, maps that are required for different types of activities, includes the list that's before you, which I won't go through reading to keep it brief. The approach for this was somewhat lighter, as I mentioned, clarifications, reorganizing some text for flow. We put the definitions in the existing subdivision ordinance at the back of it, simply because typically when one goes to look at a list of, or some regulations, you don't typically want to read through a list of definitions. You tend to look at a definition if you need to know what something means. And similar to a textbook, you'd go to the back of the book. So that's why we did that. But we may, in the end, want to consider putting those subdivision definitions in with the overall code definition. So that has yet to be determined. And if you have a suggestion on that, we're open to hearing that as well. And let's see, we provide information on maps required and the level of decision maker review. We put those into two different tables just for simplicity of use. And that sums up the subdivision overview. And with that, sure.
I just noticed on page 245, I don't know, it had yellow under condominium conversions and the decision makers, the planning commission in yellow. And then when I turn over to page 269 under application process and review procedures, it says action by decision maker, and it lists the director. And I'm assuming that, and that's not in yellow, so am I assuming that the director should be in there for condominium conversions?
So our thought there was, we don't get a lot of condominium conversions. We wondered if, as a type of subdivision, if this would be an appropriate action to be placed in the community development director as the decision-making authority. So some actions that the city has, such as lot line adjustments, which was another one, we currently have at the approval level by the community development director. Some of these, maybe I'd say, simpler types of actions. So that just was to highlight that as a topic of discussion. We wanted to kind of work that through ourselves and look back over our experience with condominium conversions, which has not happened for a long time, and see if that would warrant maybe being an additional action that we could.
We used to do a lot of them in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
I was appraising a lot of those back in.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, they moved a lot of apartments into condominiums.
Yeah. So that's why that's flagged there. It's just as a kind of a flagging it for our attention to think, okay, is there a different level of approval authority that we should think about here that would be appropriate, and let you see that we were looking at that. And
I just noticed one was in yellow and the other one wasn't, so I just
and
wanted.
I think I may not have seen that second one, so that, thanks for that.
My question is, I know that apartments are converted to condominiums. Are condominiums ever converted back to apartments? And is that covered? It seems to me Peachtree was condominiums and then they converted to rentals, or am I mistaken from that?
I'm not familiar with the experience at the Peachtree Apartments.
Peachtree?
Yeah.
I appraised all of them.
Okay.
And
They were
They
condominiums.
were condominiums. They were apartments that converted to condominiums. And I don't think they ever converted back, because I know some people that bought them, but
Okay,
same as on Callan Street up there. It was a low-cost area, and they converted those to condos.
And there were some condominiums on the corner of Nut Tree and Marshall?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about? Across
Walnut
from
Grove
St.
or
Joseph's?
Walnut Glen,
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
And those are apartments again now, I think, but they were condominiums.
Well, I didn't know they
So I
converted
wondered
back.
if we should have something in the code about condominiums converting to apartments. Or,
Well, yeah, that's a good question. We can take a look at that. In most cases, something like that, it's the condominium map simply allows individual purchase of the units versus a rental unit, which you cannot sell the individual units. Doesn't mean that they could not be owned by one entity and rented out as an apartment project. And
Right.
in
I just
some
wondered if that
cases,
ever happened.
in new projects, you do see that these days where a project is built, a multifamily project, it might be built to condominium standards, but not immediately sold as individual units, so that it may be rented for quite some period of time before a decision is made to begin selling, offering units for sale. So we can take a look at that. I've never heard of that sort of going back the other
I was just
direction.
wondering if we should have it, because has it ever happened?
Made a note to have an internal discussion with the city planners and the city engineer to just consider that. Oh, that really concludes our overall presentation. I just wanted to highlight the things that we put into each chapter, and would like to hear your input.
So Commissioners, do we have comments aside from those that we've already had? Don't see anybody that wishes to. I know, Alan Johnson. Go ahead, Commissioner Johnson.
Someday we're going to get used to this new system, I promise. Two general comments. I think anytime we can defer to existing state law or federal law and not rewrite it in our own code and then have to change it every time that code changes, I think that would be, or make our process less cumbersome. So as just a general statement. And as far as the table for condominium conversion, since we were talking about it, I'm okay leaving it with the Planning Commission because they happen so infrequently, or if at all now, in this market. So that's my 2 cents.
I don't really have anything else that I want to add. I know this is a business item, no action, but just take comments. It does allow for public comments. I'm going to go ahead and open it and ask if any of our members of the audience wish to come up and speak. Don't see anyone coming this way, so I'll go ahead and close the public input portion. So again, there's no formal action on our part this evening. Didn't get a lot of detailed discussion, which most of the time I think means we're okay with the direction that you seem to be going, and something that makes it easier for somebody who is coming in to use the code to see what it is, rather than chasing around 5 or 6 different volumes and flipping around the different pages to figure out what's going on. Actually to see things in one spot and to have a unified set of definitions, rather than like the federal, where a take is a different thing depending upon which agency it is. I think that simplification is a good thing. So, thank you. That then concludes 8A. 8B is the public involvement strategy, which is also a business item, but it is an action. on our part at the end. So looks like it's, which staff member is going to be presenting?
I will be presenting, and Brett will be Vanna White for me here.
Okay. Then, Mr. Barley, you have the floor.
Okay. Just a moment, get the PowerPoint. Okay, so we wanted to bring this public involvement strategy to you. We actually had a discussion with you a few months back, and based on that discussion, we went to the city council, had a discussion with them, and actually presented the draft of this public involvement strategy. So now we're bringing it back to you, and then we're going to be taking it to the city council next week for their actual adoption. So Fred, can I get the next slide, please? So just overall, public involvement is very important to achieving our goals as a community. In fact, the general plan vision states that the city will achieve the vision of the general plan through bold civic leadership, citizen participation, assistance, and responsive, accountable government. So it's a very important part of what we do. So what we're trying to achieve with this public involvement program is there's always state requirements for what you have to do, and there's city minimums for what you have to do to involve the public. But really what we're trying to do is go beyond that and establish an expectation that there will be more involvement than just simply the minimums. It's easy to draw a line and say you have to do this notice and it has to say this and you have to do this in a certain amount of days and meet those minimum standards. But we really expect that applicants and the city itself will do an effort to meaningfully reach out to the public and give opportunities for comments and give a good opportunity for feedback and interaction with the public. So when we presented before, we said that any public involvement strategy needs to involve these four main items. The first is notice. There has to be a way to get notice out to the public that something's going on that they ought to be interested in. And so we talked about ways to do that. There's the on-site notice, there's newspaper notices, and we talked about ways to expand the notice radius and to improve the content of the notice and do other things to use other media, use social media, use our TV station, use radio advertisements to increase notice. And then second was information sharing, where the public can have an opportunity to review something and know what's there and be able to understand in a meaningful way what's going on. So our website's a wonderful resource for that because you can post endless amounts of information. Somebody wants to know just kind of what's going on, they can read that, and then you can click on it, and if you want to see the detailed plan, so that's a really good resource. There's also other resources. Sometimes we do printed material. We created a brochure on housing recently, and we keep printing more because they keep on going out the door, so people are very interested in that. The third part of the strategy is really the power of public involvement is this exchange of ideas where you can sit with somebody and say, well, what about this? Well, here's why that is. Oh, well, could you do it this way? Well, we might be able to do this, and we would like this. And so that exchange is really the powerful thing. And that happens best in a workshop session or just neighborhood meeting or a drop-by session or at the counter, or we have the online forum, which is Let's Talk Vacaville, which is intended to be more than just a website where you're just giving information, but more of an interchange of ideas. And then the fourth is the public input, where there's meaningful opportunities for people to come to a meeting or to write or to, we had an email sent today that provides different opportunities for public input. Fred? And then we talked about having different levels of expectations for different levels of projects. You know, a fence variance for your backyard fence, well, that's going to affect, you know, your neighbor. It's not going to affect people 10 blocks away. So that you would expect that that would be a very small level of public input, impact. Medium impact might be something that affects the surrounding neighborhood, but not really much beyond that. A large impact might affect several blocks or an entire neighborhood. And then there's those citywide impact projects, which, you know, really affect everybody. So we talked about doing different levels of expectation for public involvement on each of those, and set expectations based on that impact. And we detailed those in the strategy. And then we took this to the city council, and we took it to you and took it to the city council. And one thing that was brought up was, okay, well, you've gone through a process, you've made a decision, well, now what happens? And so we added a fifth element on there, which was feedback, adjustment, and evaluation, so that you know, after a decision's made, okay, like the decision was made tonight, well, how do people know what the decision was? How do they know what's going to happen after that? So this feedback mechanism. So we added an element of, you know, making decisions available and publishing decisions, and so people know what happened with their input. And then, you know, the adjustment and evaluation. Okay, we tried this, that worked, did that not work? Were we successful? Were we not successful? And, you know, how do technology change? How do methods of communication change? And so we don't anticipate that this plan will be set in stone for 50 years until, you know, Facebook is some ancient history or something like that. So we need to continually evaluate and modify. So we added that element based on the feedback we got. So we recommend that you recommend the City Council adopt the public involvement strategy, and that concludes the report.
So you want input on the input strategy. Commissioner
Yes,
Johnson, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a very hot topic in the city, and a very challenging one from staff perspective and just city perspective to really address, because it's difficult to reach such a broad audience. And I think all of the different media outlets that we're working with currently are definitely on the right track. So I think that's a good strategy. I follow the city on Facebook. I'm curious what the thought might be to maybe sponsored ads to target additional Vacaville followers, because, you know, if the people don't currently follow the city, they're out of the loop, and I think there's probably plenty of users that would see an ad potentially and say, hey, follow us and find out what's going on in town, and they'll be like, okay, and follow, and then now they're getting fed all of that information. That's a very detailed recommendation, but overall, I like the plan.
I'd like to provide some little feedback. We have done that. There's opportunities in Facebook that you can boost your ad. You pay a few extra bucks and you boost it. We did that, and we're doing the downtown plan. We put out a survey on downtown, and we wanted more feedback, so we did push that out, and we ended up getting hundreds of responses to that. It's like, wow, that really works. So that is a very effective method we found.
I think having all of these in place are a good thing, but then you actually have to market to people to get them to go to where you want them to go that has all the information, right? So there's marketing for your marketing.
Yes.
I think the idea that people know that they were actually listened to and that they made a difference is an important portion, you said, of the marketing of your marketing. So you spent some of your time with us. Here's what we did. And I think that's an important one. And I agree that there's if there's financial resources on it, don't skimp on the resources. The goodwill you get from good public outreach is really important, and the flip side, the bad will you get from ineffective public outreach lasts for a really long time. Commissioner Beaumont.
I kind of remember when we talked about this, that we should make it a broader impact than smaller, because like Mount Rocky, we didn't go far enough with the number of homes, the breadth of people that were impacted or thought they were impacted by that antenna. So when we talked about it, I thought, you know, if it was a small impact, it would really be beneficial to make it a medium impact, broader notice, so that you didn't miss anybody, because what you may think is small, somebody a block away or two may think something else. You don't know how it impacts other people. You think you do, but you really don't. And so I'd rather see more people get notices than not enough. And I guess that's my point, is I'd rather see a broader outreach than just what you think is required, or what the city thinks is required. That's just the way I remember the conversation we had last time.
Commissioner Aldrich.
I was thinking to tag on to yours, Commissioner Beaumont, tonight that we discussed that median that's going to be extended on Alamo Drive, so that the people on Raleigh will now not be able to turn left. Have those people been, will they be notified? Have they been notified, the people that live on Raleigh, that this is going to happen?
So we did kind of use this as a way to kind of test this method. So we did have a public meeting ahead of time, so we could present that sort of information to the neighbors. Yes.
Because I can just imagine when that gets poured, the outcry of folks that, what do you mean I can't turn left here?
Yeah, and I don't think the input's done, because I think you know that may not happen for another year to actually be put in. So it'd be good note to say, hey, maybe 9 months from now we should.
Again, it's not going to affect thousands, but it'll probably affect enough for an uprising of some sort.
Do I have other commissioners that wish to speak? Okay, this is a public meeting where we're actually taking action, but Commissioner Beaumont decided he didn't want to speak. So I will go ahead and open the public hearing and ask if any members of the audience wish to come and speak. Please state your name for the record.
You're it.
Please.
The public has arrived. I'm Marjorie Kelly, and I live.
One moment, please.
Now it is.
I'm Marjorie Kelly. I live in Leisure-Town, and I'm a subject matter expert here on public input because we've been working on the Green Tree Planning Project, as you know, for some time. Years, as a matter of fact, and we expect it will go on for years. Which brings me to my first comment, which is the provision in the large-scale project for having at least one public meeting or one neighborhood meeting. Well, in a project that's going on for 5 years, 10 years, your neighborhood is going to turn over quite a bit in that time. We figure probably about a 10% turnover in Leisure-Town. Well, 5 years from now, you're going to have quite a few new people who may have new ideas or want to have input. So I don't think one public meeting for a large project is sufficient. That's one thing. Notice is one thing that is important, and getting the word out to a broad area. But the opportunity to have some input into how the input happens is also important. And so that you can have a public meeting or a neighborhood meeting, and if people don't understand it, didn't know what was going on, didn't know how to participate, didn't feel that they had got to say what they needed to say, then you've reduced your effectiveness. So one of the suggestions that I would have is that if you have a big project, or if you have a particularly sensitive project, it may have been Old Rocky, that you actually do a little reconnaissance before you plan for input. and ask a select number of people, what do you expect? How do you think this is going to work in this neighborhood? So that people can say, well, this is really what we wanted. And I know we've had a couple of public meetings in the Leisure Town area, and, you know, some of the feedback afterwards was, well, what we really wanted was question and answer. We got good information. We had presentation. We had very good presentation by city staff, so kudos to them. But what people really wanted was be able to say, what about this? And they didn't feel that they had the time or had the opportunity to raise their hand, ask their question, and get an answer. So it didn't meet all of the expectations. So sort of pre-planning, I think, could improve by targeting the way you communicate with the communities according to the way they want to provide input. And then I would say post-planning, I'm glad to see the evaluation section up there, but the evaluation, in my mind, would not be city staff sitting around a table saying, how'd we do? It would, in fact, be evaluation forms that people could fill out in the moment, after the meeting, whether it's a formal meeting or a neighborhood meeting or whatever, that asks the specific questions. Did you get your questions answered? Did this meet your expectations? Et cetera, et cetera. So that the evaluation portion should come in feedback from the public back to you, so that you can do better planning then on your next event. So those are a few of my observations. As well as just asking the question, I know this is a public hearing and I know this is a plan that was put out to the public, but how much general public input has there been into the public participation plan?
Any input on how much outreach there's been to the public on the public participation plan?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a reason why we've taken several months on this, so that, I mean, the public input has been posted on our website and 2 Planning Commission and 2 City Council meetings. That's what we've done for this.
Yeah, okay. So I attend the Vacaville Community Association meetings, and this is a group of people that has gathered together based on concerns that they've had about planning projects in town and trying to figure out ways to improve their ability to have input into development projects. So this plan is a good thing for that group, for example, to discuss, to say, given your experience with the tower, given your experience with Leisure Town, given your experience with whatever project is happening, does this plan meet what we're looking for as we communicate with the city and with the developer?
Barton, are there provisions in here for outreach to community groups, whether it's VCA or to Greenbelt Alliance or to the taxpayers groups or any of those other standing groups? Is there anything in the plan that specifically would lead us to be doing outreach and contact with those groups?
In particular with the citywide projects, yes. So, you know, those are groups that you really reach out on something that reaches more than a particular neighborhood. You know, probably wouldn't go to that kind of group on like the gas bar project that we met tonight. But one of the things we noted in the citywide projects is you really need a custom citizen involvement project. A good example would be the downtown plan. That we are reaching out. You know, we've had presentations to the Rotary Club. We've had presentations to DVBID, lots of meetings with that. We've had the Citizen Advisory Committee, so a lot of that kind of outreach. So yes, definitely, that would be part of a plan.
Commissioner Brett Johnson, come back to a second.
Just a quick comment, because I do think that the public outreach does differ from a public initiated project versus a private initiated project, and that the noticing is considerably different for those two different types of projects as well. And I think from a private standpoint, we do need to consider that we're working with private property owners who have rights to develop their property as they want to develop it, per the general plan and zoning code and giving the direction. And public input is certainly important in that aspect, to make sure that additional circumstances are accounted for that affect the surrounding neighborhood. But that's maybe not necessarily the case with the public initiated projects, where the city is initiating a project and they want to do what's best for the city, and the city is its constituents. And so the involvement there is significantly more important. Not to minimize the importance of public involvement in private projects, but we also have to be cognizant of private property rights to develop their property the way they would like to. And obviously the public has the right to provide their input in those situations as well. And hopefully it's in a cohesive, synergistic way with the project applicants, and everyone's needs are addressed. So I think we do have to look at this from both a private and public standpoint.
I think the individualizing the kind of interaction you have is important. I agree. The projects are not the same. Who initiates them are not the same. And how communities respond or engage are not the same. And so I think that's part of the pre-planning that I was talking about, is that it's important to know who you're dealing with, or to have some contacts with who you're dealing with. We have, we kind of pushed our way into the process with having the liaisons, now the Leisure Town liaisons, meeting with city staff and the developer on a regular basis, and that's a good thing. We're happy about that. But it strikes me that many projects might have been less anxiety producing for neighborhoods if a few people, an unofficial group, 2 or 3 neighbors or some small group, was able to sit down through the process with the city and just sort of keep track of what was going on and provide input. So having a neighborhood group represent their views on a continuous basis, I think, is a good idea as well.
And knowing which projects are going to be sufficiently controversial or have enough attention that an ad hoc group or early neighborhood reach out on not just the project but the process is important.
Yes.
Is at best an art form, and one that's very difficult to get right. So
it is, and I think it's on the one hand, I appreciate city staff are overworked and have dozens of projects to keep track of and do. But what happens is if you make neighborhoods angry, or people are going to come out and say, well, you didn't listen to us, or this didn't happen, it's going to increase your workload, not reduce it. So a little bit of work up front may actually make things go a little more smoothly down the road, and actually save some staff time along the way. The other thing, and I would like to make...
Brent, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you mentioned, because I do think that the plan as written now, or written, does address the kind of the complexity of the various projects that are being proposed in the small, medium, and large categories. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, in those different categories, it really defines the type of project that fit into those. And so, what it sounds like may be most appropriate in what you're saying would be additional requirements for the medium and large categories. And I think that does get addressed in this plan, correct? Yes. Yeah, okay.
You know, the other, this jogged my memory about another item, and I'm glad you brought it up, and that's the private developers who own the property, and they are going to do something with that property that they want to do. And in the situation that we have, the developer came in and had a merit hearing. And part of the merit hearing was putting forth a public participation plan, community involvement plan. But that's not been, the developer has had very little engagement with our community, with Leisure Town. They met regularly for a while with a small group of people, the task force, back when we had a task force. But there weren't any community-wide meetings planned. There wasn't general input sought. And when the task force went away, so did they. And so you've got a city document, you've had the city council vote, yeah, we're going to go ahead with merit on this project, but the plan that was presented for why it would be a good idea to go forward with this project was not completed the way at least we imagined it would be. So developers can do, they can put forward the plans they want to do, but if they say we're going to do community input, who's monitoring that? Who's enforcing that? If the city is making decisions on the basis that something's going to happen and it doesn't happen, we're just kind of out there wondering. So anyway, did anybody have any other questions?
I don't, but thanks for being the member of the public who came up and spoke with us tonight.
I appreciate it.
Greatly appreciated. Since there are no other members of the public in the audience, I'm going to go ahead and close the public meeting and ask, are there any other commissioner comments, or are we ready to send this on to the council for action? Commissioner Alan Johnson.
I just have a question for Director Brierly. Two locations in this. On our page 287, it talks about the city has a permit software for every application. Is that correct? Yes, it is. Okay, and then towards the end, page 291, it says that every project, small through citywide, has a project listing online. Is that the same thing we're talking about? And how do members of the public get to that?
Okay. I think I showed last time on the web, gave you a little demonstration, but first of all, we do have the e-track program. So that's the basic level where any kind of permit gets submitted, you can look it up. If your neighbor's putting in a pool, you can look up and find out on that particular address, yes, they got a permit for a pool. So that's what it said. Every project has that level. And then we have kind of another level that for something like the gas power property, we can actually provide a web page which gives a lot more information and links you to more documents on that. And so there are different kinds of website listings, and then we can, add something to the front page that says, hey, there's meetings and stuff's going on that. So everything would be listed online, but there's some different levels. We have a current projects page where you can pull up current projects, and it directs you to the permit software.
Right. I did some research online today, and I tried to follow this stuff, and I did find the e-track stuff, but if you don't have a specific project to look for, you don't have the information, you're not going to get it. I was wondering, is there a clearinghouse or a place where everything is just listed, so if people were interested in how much workload the city has, or how many projects are out there, that they can just kind of see everything that's going on? Or is that something that would be cost prohibitive for us to do?
So the E-Tracket shows you everything. If you really want to know every little detail, it's all in E-Tracket. We do have a current projects page that pulls out, you know, anything that really the general public should be interested in. It does list all the staff level design reviews, all the staff level, you know, projects that are going through, plus everything that go to planning commission or city council. So we do have a current projects page that is pretty complete.
Okay. I know we do a lot of outreach, and I know that we always hear from Mrs. Kelly. Thank you for staying to the very end. I know it's a late night. But we do a lot of outreach, and I do a lot of outreach myself, and we just don't get a lot of public participation. I attended the workshop earlier at 5 this evening on the code update, and I stayed around for 30 minutes and nobody showed up. I don't know if anybody came after me. But in this day and age with social media the way it is, you almost have to be force-fed the information, you know, to get in front of your face. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Do you have any other comments before we take an action? So the recommended action is by simple motion to recommend the city council adopt the public involvement strategy as presented. Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Have a motion by Alan Johnson.
I'll second.
Have a second by Jan Aldrich. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Approved unanimously. Mr. Byerly, the status.
So this recommendation will go to the city council at their January 28th meeting.
And I would expect that there was probably a few of them may have been watching this item. If not, we had, I think, some pretty good input here with our public representative. Item number 9, status reports on development and major projects. Current planning.
All right, I can give you an update on current planning, what they're up to these days. The City Council did approve general plan amendments to change the land use designations on a number of properties. The Planning Commission saw this and made a recommendation to the council late last year. So this was to amend the general plan for projects where we had, after analyzing zoning, determined that the zoning and land use designations should be brought into conformance by amending the general plan to match some existing uses or designations. So that was approved and has moved along. The current planning staff are currently reviewing an application for the house plans that are proposed by a builder for the Farmstead subdivision out there on North Orchard. So they've received the application for house plans to be built in the subdivision there. And they've recently received a variance for a side yard setback, a different area, but just a small variance application that's currently under review. A large number of home occupation permits were reviewed in the last month, and building permits, quite a few plot plans approved for single-family home construction. These are spread throughout all the various new growth areas. So Brighton Landing, quite a few of the villages out there still receiving building permits for single-family homes. The North Village Unit 7, which is, I believe, over kind of the farthest north as you're going along Interstate 505 out in that area. Vanden Estates and Parkside, so these are projects down in the Vanden Meadows specific plan area, so south of the Southtown development area along Vanden Road. So those are starting to pull building permits for single-family homes. And that is the report for current planning.
Fred and I have seen several comments on social media with questions about what's that big tower over near Journey Coffee?
Okay.
So that would kind of be a current planning project. So what's that big tower?
That big tower is a building that is being built directly next to Journey. It will have a small tenant space, the use of which I don't know if has an approved tenant in there yet, but there will be a small ground floor tenant space, and it's just a monumental tower feature on the property to kind of implement the owner's plans to revitalize that center, make it more of a destination, and do some placemaking on the property by creating great public spaces out there. So I think there is an expanded outdoor use area that's will be available right next door to or right around that tower.
So it
Quite
was like-
an interesting feature if you
Yeah.
drive by and see that frame.
Put
up
like
there.
a clock tower and then an electric vehicle charging station down at the bottom of it and see if Marty McFly shows up. 9B, advanced planning.
Okay, and advanced planning. Let's see, some of the major activities going on. So you saw the code update amendment. We have one more module to go on that, and that is looking at administrative and approval procedures that are contained in the code. So this will be an important section coming up. It was originally scheduled for January. We don't think we'll be able to complete that in time to get to you, it was originally scheduled for February. I don't think we'll be able to complete that to get that to your meeting in February, so we're thinking March is the most likely date at which you'd be asked to review that preliminary draft. And I think, thinking about the amount of public input and participation, tonight's module is a little more, I don't know, less likely to draw a lot of interest from folks. We did some individualized outreach to engineering firms related to this module, just to let them know that some of the stuff that they work with regularly was going to be reviewed. And we'll talk to them as we move forward with those highlighted areas too that you saw in there. The next module, I think, may get a lot more interest from some of the people who provided comments to us at the very beginning of the code update when we did the audit of what could be improved in the code. And a lot of those improvements focused on procedural matters and how you carry a project through from application to approval. So I hope we'll get some additional participation either at this meeting or at our open house or open houses if we do more. On that module. So we should be to you by March with that next section. Other projects going on. So the downtown specific plan continues to move forward. This Thursday evening, you're all invited. There is a community workshop to ask the public to review the findings and analysis and recommendations for the what's called the Connectivity and Downtown Streetscape Plan. So this is the component of the downtown specific plan that's taking a look at how do we improve the aesthetic condition of the pedestrian environment in downtown. What can we do to make the sidewalks and pathways more attractive, the downtown streetscape, in whether that's lighting or signage and things of that nature, improving the ability of persons on bicycles to get into and through the downtown and around, taking a look at different ways of placemaking. So similar to what's you see going on out there at Alamo Plaza, are there different things that can be done in the downtown to improve the streetscape? So this Thursday evening, January 23rd, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at the McBride Senior Center is a community workshop where the consultant team will be present. They'll be showing images and drawings and plans that they've created to give a sense of what might go into that plan and what we think we could do. And we're really hoping we get a good turnout there and get some good ideas, get some good evaluation on how well we've heard people's comments over the last many months as we've held other workshops to gather ideas for downtown improvement. The same, yes, it would be the continuation of the same plan. So this is refining them to the point of being able to present some recommendations both to the Planning Commission and the City Council coming up in February and in the month of February. So this is taking all those ideas, trying to get them into a final plan. The Green Tree project continues to move forward. It is moving along at a kind of a methodical pace. We're still working with the applicant team. They are preparing their specific plan document, so they're drafting that, working on different sections as they go along. We meet with them regularly. We meet, as Marge mentioned earlier, we meet with the liaison group that participates from the neighborhood to keep them informed of the status of the project plans on a regular basis. don't believe we have any currently scheduled larger community workshops at this point because we don't have a draft plan yet from the applicant. We're still working with them on that. We're still developing the proposed scopes of work for the various technical analyses that will be done once that plan is crafted, and we can prepare a scope of work for the environmental studies that go along with that. So first they need to finish kind of refining their plan and creating a complete proposal. Then we can finish preparing scopes of work that look at drainage impacts, traffic impacts, all the other things that will go into the environmental studies that you will be asked to review in the future. And well, those are, I'd say, the major projects ongoing right now. There are a few others looking at construction plans for some of the subdivisions, like Farmstead, so their subdivision plans are in for review. There's some ongoing analysis of the experience of other communities who have adopted cannabis sales ordinances. So the council has asked community development and the police department to come back with some analysis this spring to just kind of describe how well these are working in other communities that have ordinances that have allowed this use, and to allow the council to consider whether they want to move forward with a change to the city's code for that. And I think that would kind of sum up where we are right now.
Thank you, Fred. Commissioner Brent Johnson.
I understand that the Lagoon Valley project recently transacted. What's the current status of the entitlements and improvement plans?
Yeah, I can address that. So yes, Triad has purchased the Lagoon Valley project. The approvals are all valid, and they are working on construction plans with the expectation to begin some work this spring.
What is the actual status of the improvement plans?
They are all either 100% ready or 99% ready or 94% ready, or I mean they've been working on them for years, and so it's they've been through many reviews, and just a matter of they're making.
And final map is ready to record condition 2.
No.
Okay. So that's still some time.
Yeah.
Barton, you have the floor,
Yeah,
so why don't you continue into the item number 10, Director's Report.
Okay. So past city council items, the last meeting, the city council heard the Vacaville Hotel project, which you had heard, and the commission or the council approved that project. They also heard a resolution to include Vacaville in a sub-arena project. So what that is you have the regional housing needs assessment that ABAG, the regional government, is supposed to assign to each city. But cities have an opportunity to kind of team up and make a sub-region, and in that case, ABAG will give a allocation to that sub-region, and then the members of that sub-region divvy it up among themselves. That's the way we did that in the last go-around of the arena, and looks like the cities and the county are all agreeable to making Solano County a sub-region and doing the same process again. So the city council agreed with being part of that sub-arena. Also, the city council passed a resolution on development impact fees for accessory dwelling units. The state law made some modifications to how cities can charge impact fees for accessory dwelling units. Notably, they exempted accessory dwelling units under 750 square feet from all development impact fees, so we implemented that, and then it changed the methodology for ones over 750 square feet, and so we changed our methodology to conform to that. At the upcoming city council on the 28th, they will hear the public involvement strategy that you heard tonight, also the accessory dwelling unit ordinance that you had already passed on that. I'll report that we submitted our draft ordinance to the state housing department, had a conversation with them, got some feedback, and have made some minor changes to the ordinance based on that feedback. So that's what's going to the council. And then we expect on the 11th, the Alamo Mixed Use Project to go to them. Upcoming on Planning Commission, we did note we do have a special meeting on February 4th to be dedicated to the downtown streetscape and connectivity plan, so thank you for that. And then on February 18th, we'll have our regular meeting. We have a few items that are kind of tentative for that meeting. One thing we're looking at doing is presenting a land need inventory. So what we adopted the general plan in 2015, which is hard to believe it's going to be 5 years now, and one of the expectations was that every 5 years we would analyze our needs and see if there's additional land needs that we need to address. And so we're preparing an inventory of just how much development's occurred in the last 5 years and some forecasts on future land needs, and so we want to present that to you, and we're anticipating to do that on February 18th. So that concludes my report.
Last thing on the items list is number 11, commissioner comments. Start on my right, head to the left. Any commissioner comments? See none? Yeah, as Dan said, we've had plenty of chance to talk tonight. Then I will see everyone on February 4th, where we'll have a chance to celebrate the San Francisco 49ers as world champions, and then go ahead and have a meeting.
Wow.
So we are now item number 12, adjournment. Good night, Vacaville.